Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Was Never Found? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. You'll never be able to beat me, Deku. Why don't you just eat shit and die? As Izuku Midoriya walked home from school, Kaken's words bounced around in his head. Why were third graders so mean? Where had he even learned that kind of language anyway? Gently he rubbed his bruised shoulder. Kaken sure was getting strong. He was probably going to be a great hero. And what about you? A voice taunted in the back of Izuku's mind. Kaken is right. You're too weak to beat anyone, even if they don't use their quirk on you. And what if they did? You'd be blown to bits or frozen or turned to dust before you could even blink. Izuku sighed, trudging up his front steps. He called a greeting to his mom before making a beeline for his room and collapsing on his red, yellow, and blue all-might bedspread. Was he really too weak to ever be a hero? Izuku laid in his bed like that, fully dressed and half asleep, until the sun set and shadows crept into his room. He ignored his mom's call for dinner. He didn't think he'd be able to stomach it anyway. He didn't move for several hours until he felt a strange tingle on the back of his neck. Cautiously he sat up. It was dark in his room, and he was alone. But for some reason Izuku felt like he was being watched. Slowly, he made his way over to the window and stood on tiptoe to peer out. Nobody there. With a sigh, Izuku turned to collapse on his bed again, but froze when he was faced with two men he had never seen before. One of the men was young, he barely looked old enough to be out of high school. His hair was a pale blue tangled mess, and his clothes were ratty and didn't quite fit. The other man seemed to be made entirely out of purple and black smoke, and he was wearing a nice business suit. Both were extremely intimidating. "What are you doing in my room?" Izuku squeaked after a long pause. If these men were dangerous, the last thing he wanted to do was upset them. The man with the blue hair smiled, then extended his hand, keeping one finger lifted just so. "We're here to do what the heroes should have done a long time ago, Izuku Midoriya," he rasped. "We've come to save you." An hour or so later, a knock came on the bedroom door. "Izuku!" The door creaked open, and Inko Midoriya poked her head in cautiously. But the room was dark and empty. The bed was cold. Izuku Midoriya was long gone. The next day, Katsuki Bakugo kept glancing at the empty desk usually occupied by his former friend. Had he been too hard on him? It wasn't like Deku to miss school on the day of an important presentation like this. For the rest of the day, he had a hard time focusing. The empty seat across the room seemed to draw his eyes. Nobody else really seemed to notice that Deku was absent. It wasn't until he returned home that he found out what had happened. A school photo of his classmate filled the TV screen. Katsuki stopped eating his dinner and turned up the volume on the news. The news anchor, next words made his blood run cold. Izuku Midoriya, age 9, had somehow disappeared without a trace. 6 years had passed since Izuku Midoriya's disappearance. Every year when the day came around, Katsuki Bakugo couldn't help feeling kind of guilty. Even though everyone had collectively decided that his former friend had been somehow dispatched by villains, it was hard for Katsuki not to blame himself. The last words he'd ever spoken to Deku rattled about in his head. "Why don't you just eat shit and die?" Katsuki gripped the shoulder straps of his backpack so hard his knuckles turned white, and smoke started coming from his fists. He grumbled, let go, and shoved his hands in his pockets. Since Deku had vanished, Katsuki had done his best to honor his childhood friend's memory. It was mostly because he felt somehow responsible for it all. He'd tried to be nicer to people, tried to be the kind of guy who deserved to be a hero, but it was always so hard for him to keep a handle on his anger. He'd already been going to UA for 2 days, but the bright shining faces and unwavering kindness of a few of his classmates had reminded him painfully of his old friend, and he snapped at them more than he probably should. They reminded him so much of Deku that it made his chest ache. Especially Floaty Girl. What was her name anyway? He had tried to remember. Yura something, wasn't it? Shame welled inside him as a sudden thought crossed his mind. Deku would have remembered. He clenched his fists in his pockets and shoved the thought away. Deku was gone. And he wasn't coming back. Katsuki kept walking. He just wanted to go home and sleep. Katsuki was so lost in his thoughts as he walked, that when a voice came from an alley as he passed, he practically jumped out of his skin. There you are. A small figure with a hood that cast a shadow over his eyes and a metal mask that covered up to his nose stepped out of the shadows. His hoodie was clearly way too big for him, his jeans were torn and stained, and there was a hole in his left red sneaker where his socked big toe poked through. He was wielding dual swords that glinted in the dimly lit alley, and a belt of knives hung loose around his hips. I've been looking for you, Katsuki Bakugo. A chill ran down Katsuki's spine, and he growled and slung off his backpack, readying himself for a fight. Yeah? Who the hell are you? The hooded figure didn't reply, instead dropping into a crouch and readying his swords. To hell with this. Katsuki had plenty of anger pent up right now, and if this sad 2-bit villain wanted a fight, well, he'd get one. A growl turned into a battle cry as Katsuki launched himself at the villain and tried to blow him to hell, but a flash of steel cut through the blast, and before he knew it, he was flat on his back in the alley. The hooded villain crouched over him, holding one of his blades at the ready. The blast had dislodged a few too long dark curls from under the villain's hood, and now that he was up close, Katsuki could see a long, angry purplish scar slashed across his face between two bright, cold, tired, and furious green eyes. The villain spoke again. Did you miss me, Kaken? Kaken? Katsuki was taken aback by the use of his childhood nickname and he blinked. He hadn't let anyone call him that since. He didn't get a chance to finish his thought as the hooded figure suddenly brought his blade slashing down toward Katsuki's throat. Taken off guard, all he had time to do was throw his hands up in front of his face and try to throw him off with the biggest explosion he could muster. But something was wrong. Sudden searing pain pierced both of his hands, and that explosion should have been way bigger. But the villain had been thrown off, so before the smoke cleared, Katsuki hauled himself to his knees and brought his hands up to his face to look at them. A deep slash ran through both of his palms, cutting far into the muscle and oozing blood. Experimentally, he twitched his left hand and tried activating his quirk, but he was only able to produce a small, bright pop before blinding pain stopped him, and he screamed through clenched teeth. Suddenly, Katsuki was gripped by panic. I can't use my quirk. I can't use my hands. What do I do? How do I fight? Panic was replaced by rage and he rounded on his attacker as the smoke cleared. You fuck dash, he broke off abruptly. Standing opposite him, staring in numb shock, was the villain. His hood had been completely blown off by the blast, and one side of his mask had come loose so it hung uselessly from behind one ear. He held his dual swords limply at his sides. In the light spilling into the alley from the street, Katsuki could now see that his opponent's dark, too long curls were green, and the scar between his eyes continued diagonally across his face right down to his freckles. He was young, he had to be his age at the most. Katsuki Bakugo, for the first time in 6 years, stared at his old friend and classmate, and Izuku Midoriya stared back. The cold fury in his eyes was gone, and they met Katsuki's. Deku. The silence was deafening. You're not dead. Deku looked horrified. His eyes darted to Katsuki's hands, then to the blood dripping from one of his swords. He started to back away slowly without saying a word. No, wait, but Katsuki was too late. Deku had already turned and fled, and before he could say anything else, the boy disappeared over a fire escape. Katsuki stood there in that alley for a long time, thinking. Deku was alive? More importantly, he was a villain? The thought was so strange. In his memory he wanted nothing more than to be a hero. Another thought crossed his mind. Deku, Quirkless Deku, had just taken him down in seconds. The boy who had always been weaker, smaller, lesser, the boy who trembled as he stood between Katsuki and whatever helpless kid he'd been picking on, had just rendered him completely helpless with only a few well-placed moves. Deku hadn't just beaten him, he'd completely overpowered him in about as much time as it used to take Katsuki to knock him down all those years ago. Did that mean that everyone had been wrong about him? Did that mean he really could have become a hero? A guilty pit started to form in his stomach as he remembered the way he'd responded any time Deku had brought up his ambitions. He buried his face in his hands before a sharp pain in his palms and a warm wetness on his face brought him back to reality. Looking at his palms, Katsuki realized with a grimace he was seriously hurt and probably needed medical help fast. With shaking fingers, he carefully extracted his phone from his pocket. Every time he touched the screen, his fingers left bloody smears on it. Ignoring the stabbing pains in his palms, he jabbed at the emergency call button with his elbow until his emergency contacts appeared on the screen. Considering for a moment, he decided he did not want to worry his parents quite yet and called the school, hoping Recovery Girl would be able to fix his injury and, more importantly, the way it was preventing him from using his quirk. Taking a deep breath, he pressed the call button, then brought the phone to his ear and slid down the alley wall to sit on the ground, exhausted. It's time. Izuku stood among the crowd of thugs in the warehouse they'd chosen as a meeting place, waiting for Kurogyari to warp them to the USJ facility. There they would kill All Might. He fiddled with his mask, shoving down a guilty pang. Once, he had looked up to All Might, worshipped him even. But things had changed. He remembered when Sensei told him that All Might was never coming for him. His mother had written letters, even personally gone to his agency in Tokyo to beg him to rescue her son. He refused. Tamura called to the assembled villains. It's time for the great symbol of peace to take his last breath. A cheer went up from the crowd. No, Ghost, you're with me. Let's go. Izuku looked up at the mention of his alias. Ghost, the mysterious assassin who fought with no visible quirk and took down targets in an instant. That was who he was now. He took a deep breath. Time to go. He stood at Tamura's shoulder and drew his swords. This was it. He closed his eyes and took a step through the warp gate, into the unknown. The moment he was through, he could tell something was off. The only real heroes I see are 13 and Eraserhead, Kurogyari's voice commented from somewhere in the smoke. Perplexing. According to the schedule we retrieved from UA, All Might should be here as well. Tamura looked annoyed as he scratched at his neck, and it was hard for Izuku not to flinch away from him. Where is he? I went through the trouble of bringing so many friends who are eager to meet him, he complained as thugs poured in on all sides. They want All Might, the great symbol of peace. I can't believe he's not here. Maybe if I kill a few kids he'll come out to play. His light tone made Izuku shudder. Looking out across the facility, he saw students, shielded by 13, staring at them in terror, but one face caught his eye. Kaken was looking straight at him, and his face was unreadable. He didn't get much more time to think as Eraserhead rushed them. Thugs readied their quirks and Izuku rolled his eyes. Don't be stupid, Eraserhead can cancel your quirks, he called. He watched with mild amusement as Eraserhead started kicking the sheet out of the dumbest ones. He supposed Eraserhead must have blinked, because he heard Kurogyari disappear from behind them. He reappeared behind 13 and the students, and there was an explosion as Kaken rushed him. Izuku chuckled, seeing that the attack had done basically nothing, and watched Kurogyari warp the students away around the USJ as planned. As Eraserhead tore through the assembled thugs, he stepped forward and readied his swords. The pro hero spotted him and furrowed his brow. Eraserhead probably saw his swords and realized he must be the assassin known as Ghost, because he shifted targets, and the capture weapon came flying his way. Izuku swung his sword through the air and, with a twist, wrapped the scarf around it. Then he yanked it sharply, and Eraserhead stumbled. His eyes flashed from behind his goggles, trying to erase his quirk, and Izuku caught the scarf with his foot and slammed the hero to the ground. He chuckled softly. Nice try, Eraser, but that's not gonna work on me. Eraserhead glared up at him, then grabbed his capture weapon in both hands and tugged it free. He rolled to avoid Izuku's other sword, and leapt to his feet. The hero managed to knock his foot out from under him, and he hit the ground hard. That was when Tamura decided to rush him. Eraserhead slammed an elbow into his stomach, and Tamura stumbled, but then grabbed the hero's elbow with all 5 fingers. Eraserhead's hair fell limp around his shoulders. It was hard to see while you were jumping around, but I've found your tell. It's your hair. Izuku cringed when he saw Tamura's quirk begin tearing through Eraserhead's costume, and he looked away as skin began to blister and crack. Don't push yourself too hard now, or you might just fall apart. And wouldn't that be a shame? Eraserhead's hair flew up again as he aimed a punch with his uninjured arm and leapt out of Tamura's grasp. Izuku's skin crawled at the sight of his raw, cracked elbow. Eraserhead was fighting much more desperately now as Tamura monologued some more, but he was still knocking out thugs left and right. Or he was until Nomu got a hold of him. The monstrous construct snapped the hero's arm like a twig and slammed his face into the ground hard enough to crack the concrete. Kurogiri reappeared as Izuku got to his feet. He caught Tamura's words as he approached them and stopped dead. Kurogiri, you fool. If you weren't our warp gate, I'd rip apart every last atom in your body. Izuku shuddered. When Tamura got angry, he was unpredictable and violent, and there was no telling what he might do to him if he decided he wanted to release his frustrations toward Kurogiri at someone more expendable. There's no way we can win if dozens of pros show up to stop us, he hissed. It's game over. Back to the title screen. And I was looking forward to finishing this today. Damn it. Let's go home. Izuku breathed a shaky sigh of relief. He was safe, for now at least. Then his blood ran cold as Tamura smiled wickedly from behind the hand on his face. Oh, before we leave, let's make sure the symbol of peace is broken. He turned and his eyes fell on a terrified-looking student hiding in the water, with long green hair and round, frightened eyes. Let's wreck his pride. Then he threw himself at the student, hand outstretched. Let's make this hurt. Izuku winced and turned away just before he grabbed the poor girl's face. After a pause, he heard Tamura say, "You really are so cool, Eraserhead." The hero had lifted his head, face covered with blood and screwed up with pain, and he struggled to keep using his quirk to cancel Tamura's. Then Nomu slammed his face back into the ground. Izuku looked back at Tamura and the student, whose skin started to crack under his touch. Without thinking, Izuku shouted, "Tamura, stop." The villain froze, releasing the girl, then turned to glare at him. Panicked, he hastily babbled some kind of explanation. "The heroes will be coming, we need to dash." And loud crash came from the door, and everyone looked up. The strong silhouette of All Might appeared in the smoke. And he wasn't smiling. "Have no fear, students. Because I am here." All Might stood in the entrance to the USJ, and he looked furious. Tamura grinned. After all this waiting, the heroic piece of trash shows up. Then, in a blur, All Might knocked out the remaining thugs and snatched Eraserhead and the students to safety. Tamura's eyes went wide. No. It wasn't supposed to go this way. He's still fast, father. Izuku stared at All Might, who looked every bit the righteous symbol of peace he used to worship, swooping down and saving lives in the blink of an eye. The students carried the injured Eraserhead to safety, and All Might charged Tamura, but Nomu appeared in front of him in a flash. All Might blinked in surprise when the monstrous construct resisted his attack, but quickly began his assault. Izuku watched in awe as All Might fought. But All Might isn't here for me, he reminded himself grimly. And now that he's here, I'll be lucky to get out of this without going to jail. He shook himself. Don't be stupid, we prepared for this. We can still do it. We're going to kill All Might. All Might tried to suplex Nomu, but a warp gate opened beneath them, and Nomu dug its fingers into the place he knew All Might's injury lay hidden beneath his shirt, and began pulling him through the gate. An explosion came from somewhere off to the side, and Kaken came flying toward them. He seized Kurogiri's neck armor and slammed him into the ground. "I guess I found your body that time, you smoky BSD," he snarled. Then there was a flash of ice, and a boy with red and white hair flash froze Nomu through the warp gate. "One of your poorly trained thugs told me you're here because you think you can kill All Might." The hero managed to break free from the frozen monster's grasp and landed next to his students. Another shout came from the same direction Kaken had come from, and a redhead with no shirt and a hardening quirk swooped in, aiming for Tamura, who sidestepped. "Oddman, that was going to be cool. The symbol of peace will not be defeated by delinquents like you," declared the ice user. Tamura stood still for a moment, then turned. "Kurogiri, how could you let this brat get the best of you? You've gotten us into a real jam here." Kaken laughed. You got careless, you dumb villain. It wasn't hard to figure you out. Only certain parts of you turn into that warp gate. You used that mist to hide your actual body, as a kind of distraction, thinking that made you safe. That's why we missed. Since when did Kaken think things through like this? Izuku wondered briefly. The boy he remembered was too hot-headed for strategy, and would always attack first and ask questions later. But if you didn't have a body, you wouldn't be wearing this neck armor, right? You're not immune to physical attacks if they're well aimed. Small explosions came from his palms as Kurogyari struggled. Don't move. Try anything funny and I'll dash, he cut off abruptly. He'd spotted Izuku. Just then, Nomu broke free of the ice, losing an arm and leg in the process, and pulled itself out of the warp gate. All Might commanded the students to stay back as Nomu's limbs started regenerating. Tamura began bragging about Nomu's quirks, and then ordered it to attack Kaken. There was a blur of movement, a loud crash, and suddenly Kaken was safe with the other students. All Might had saved him. Izuku's knuckles turned white as he gripped his swords. All Might had taken a hit from Nomu head-on to save Kaken. Why was Kaken worth saving? He glared at the hero, remembering how he saw him rescue his old bully on the news almost a year ago. What made him worth saving? Why him and not me? He watched as All Might told the students to stand back and stay safe. Nomu, Kurogyari, kill him, Tamura snarled. Ghost and I will deal with the children. Izuku nodded. It was time to finish this. He avoided Kaken's gaze as he held his swords at the ready, planning to aim for the ice user, who seemed to be posing the biggest threat. Let's clear this level and go home. All Might flexed, then threw a massive punch. The shockwave threw him and Tamura backwards. The power coming from the number one hero and the villain built to fight him was such that they couldn't get near them or the students. He stared at All Might in awe as he fought, and with a final punch the hero launched Nomu through the USJ's roof. You've been bested, villains, All Might declared, turning to face them. Surrender. We all want this to be over quickly. Beside him, Izuku could see that Tamura was furious. He cheated, he hissed from under the hand on his face, scratching at his neck and looking ready to scream. Izuku backed a few steps away from him nervously. What? Are you scared? All Might was taunting them. Tamura was beginning to panic, and Kurogyari reassured him. If the three of us work together, we can do this. We haven't missed our chance to kill All Might. Izuku realized with a jolt that Kurogyari was including him. Tamura slowly relaxed and lowered his hands. Yeah, you're right. This is it. We have no choice. We have to do it now. He narrowed his eyes at All Might. I mean, the big end boss is right here. Tamura charged at All Might, and Kurogyari followed, but Izuku found himself rooted to the spot. But just as Tamura's fingers were about to make contact, a gunshot rang out. They looked up. Oh no. The pros are here, he hissed in annoyance. Kurogyari's warp gate surrounded Izuku and Tamura, but not before he saw him get shot in the arm and both legs by the pro hero snipe, and then, suddenly, Izuku was back in the bar that was their hideout. He saw that Tamura's upper body was still halfway through the warp gate, probably trying to get a last word in, and he retreated to his room. He did not want to be there when Tamura's inevitable temper tantrum began. With a sigh, Izuku collapsed onto the old, sagging mattress sitting in the corner of the supply closet he called home and closed his eyes. God, he was tired. So tired. Katsuki walked home after the USJ attack, thoughts racing. Deku had been there. He stood right beside Shigaraki. He was there fighting All Might. He ran his fingers through his hair. God, this was so FNG backwards. Why the hell would Deku ever want to hurt the number one hero? He'd worshipped All Might even more than Katsuki had. So what the hell was happening? When he got home, he headed straight to his room and sat at his computer. It was time to do some research. It took about a half hour of trying different Google searches before he found a grainy security camera picture that, though low-res, showed Deku's unmistakable dual swords. The news article it was attached to called him Ghost. Was that his villain identity? Another Google search confirmed it was, and he found several long forum discussions arguing about Ghost's quirk. There were links to more news articles about various attacks attributed to him. One of them had a slideshow of pictures, and he had to dismiss a warning about graphic content to see them. Katsuki's mouth went dry when the first picture filled the screen. It was another picture from a security camera, higher quality this time. He wished it wasn't. Deku was facing the camera, and his eyes were cold and emotionless under his hood. His victim was lifted off the ground by the two curved blades that came out of their back, and they were clearly dead. Feeling slightly nauseated, Katsuki clicked to the next picture. A woman with long blonde hair lay face down in a large puddle of blood. He clicked again. Security footage of Deku standing over someone in a heap on the ground. A graffitied wall splashed with blood, a few throwing knives embedded in the bricks. A middle-aged man cowering on the ground with Deku standing over him, sword raised. A limp body hanging from the knives that pinned its arms to the wall, head hanging down and shirt drenched in dark blood. He closed the window, feeling like he might vomit. Holy F dash. This was serious. He stared out the window. It was already dark. He couldn't get his old friend's face out of his head. When they met in the alley, after he was unmasked and he saw what he'd done, Deku had looked horrified. And then in the USJ, when that hand guy started getting mad, the green eyes under his hood were afraid, and he'd edged away. Did he not have a choice in all this? Had Deku truly turned to villainy, or was the League of Villains somehow forcing him into it? Izuku sat in the dimly lit bar, bent over his notebook, scrawling notes as the UA Sports Festival played on the small television in front of him. So far, there had been an obstacle race where Kaken tied for first with the boy with the ice quirk from the USJ by tackling him over the finish line, and a cavalry battle, and the first match of the first bracket had just finished. The winner had been a boy with some kind of mind control quirk that appeared to be triggered by verbally responding to his questions. He wasn't in the hero course, because his non-combative quirk hadn't been any help in UA's entrance exam, which consisted of fighting robots. But he had just beaten a girl from the hero course with a powerful sound-based quirk after only a few seconds of antagonizing her. The moment she opened her mouth to reply, he had won. Now, he was watching the second match, Tokoyami versus Yaoyorozu. The bird-headed student had an overwhelmingly powerful quirk called Dark Shadow, and it didn't take long for his opponent to push out of bounds. Her quirk, Creation, was interesting and offered many possibilities, but she seemed to lack the quick thinking and battlefield awareness to use it properly. Next up was Hantasiro versus Shuto Todoroki. Todoroki. Why was that name familiar? Maybe he was related to someone? He flipped backwards through his notebook, which was full of information on various heroes. Their quirks, their weaknesses, and wherever he could find it, their real names. He searched through it for heroes with ice quirks. Weird. He watched as the boy with the tape quirk was frozen in a massive display of power. The match was over in seconds. Then, Todoroki took a moment to release his opponent. Steam rose from his left hand. Wait, he had a heat quirk too? Of course. Izuku flipped rapidly through his notebook, searching for a specific page. The number 2 hero, Endeavor. His real name, Enji Todoroki. He sat back in his chair, thinking. If Shuto Todoroki had an ice quirk and a fire quirk, he would be almost unstoppable. A powerful ice quirk would negate every weakness he had listed on Endeavor's page, and he assumed the fire quirk would do the same for the ice. So why hadn't he used his fire yet? The screen showed a close-up of Todoroki's face. On the left side of his face, the side with his father's red hair and blue eye, there was a large burn scar, and although he had just won the fight, he looked miserable. Then, the cameraman cut to Endeavor in the stands, looking downright furious. Was it because his son wasn't using his fire quirk? Izuku chewed the end of his pencil absent-mindedly as he thought. That sure was a convenient combination of quirks for Endeavor's child to have. From what he'd heard, the flame hero was ambitious and sometimes downright cruel, and he wanted nothing more than to surpass All Might as the number 1. If he thought he'd never be able to do it on his own, he might be trying to make his son into some kind of successor by combining his quirk with one that negated its disadvantages. Although it was immoral and old-fashioned, a quirk marriage was certainly not outside the realm of possibilities. And if Endeavor was training his son to succeed him, it seemed likely that he was being overbearing, if not downright abusive. That would explain his reluctance to use his father's fire quirk. He continued taking notes as a boy with an electric quirk was immediately immobilized by a girl with powerful vines. Her quirk must have negated his because the vines acted as an insulator against the electricity. Interesting. There was a girl from the support course who appeared to be stringing her opponent along to drag the fight out as long as she could so she could show off her inventions. He had to admit they were impressive. She was easily able to outmaneuver her opponent even though he had a speed quirk, and stayed just out of his reach while she demonstrated her many gadgets. A girl with an acid quirk was able to easily outmaneuver her classmate with a belly button laser. The way she produced acid from her feet and used it for mobility was clever, and she seemed to be an excellent gymnast. Next up were two boys with near-identical quirks and fighting styles, Kirishima and Tetsu. One had a quirk that hardened his skin to something stone-like, the other could turn his skin to steel. Their fight went on for a while, and Izuku snorted when the two of them were knocked out at the same time. The last match of the first round was Kaken versus a girl named Uraraka. He grimaced as they took their fighting stances. This girl was dead meat. Izuku was surprised when Uraraka was the first to make a move. She sprinted toward her opponent, keeping her center of gravity low. Kaken knocked her back again and again, but she kept coming. He sat up in his chair and watched closer. She charged over and over without stopping to recover, and it took him a while to figure out her plan. She was staying low so that every time Kaken threw her back, he tore up the floor of the ring. It was hard to see through all the smoke from the explosions, but he spotted pieces of debris floating up to the sky. Uraraka must have an anti-gravity quirk, but since she wasn't able to get in close enough to directly use it on Kaken, she was having him use his power to create weapons for her. That was clever. He raised an eyebrow as the crowd started jeering at Kaken. It wasn't hard to see why. It was easy to glance at the fight and see a boy with a powerful quirk relentlessly attacking a helpless girl, but that wasn't what was happening here. Looking closely at Kaken, Izuku could see his eyes were wild as he fended off one attack after another. This fight wasn't as one-sided as it looked. Suddenly, the girl stopped. She said something that nobody could hear over the crowd, and Kaken stared at her. She touched her fingers together and he looked up. The camera panned up too, and suddenly dozens of boulders were falling fast. Kaken's eyes went wide. He hadn't been expecting this at all. He braced himself, raised a hand, and let loose his biggest blast yet. His explosion took out the whole meteor shower, and Uraraka was thrown backwards. She struggled to her feet but collapsed. Kaken had won. Izuku couldn't help noticing that Kaken was trembling. It had been close, far closer than it looked. He chewed the end of his pencil, thinking. Katsuki sat in the stands watching Icy Hot fight in his second match. He was up against the plant girl from 1B who'd stomped Piku. He seemed to be having a bit of a harder time, since she could attack with her vines even when she'd been immobilized. His ice was smaller and slower than before. Had he seriously used up all his power fighting tape arms? And what about his fire? Half and Half wasn't an idiot. Surely he knew that fire would be better than ice against plants. Come on, it's basic type matchups. What the hell is he doing? He was clearly getting desperate now, dodging vines left and right, but he still wasn't using his left side. Suddenly, Katsuki sat up in his seat. A vine had wrapped around Icy Hot's left wrist. A close-up on the big screen showed his eyes went wide with sudden fear, and a moment later, a huge blast engulfed the ring. A wave of hot air rushed over the stands, like someone had opened a giant oven, and it took several seconds for the steam to clear. When it did, the crowd gasped. Half and Half was on his hands and knees, shoulders heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. The vine girl was unconscious against the wall of the ring. For a moment the arena was quiet. Todoroki wins. The big screen showed a close-up of his face. Was he crying? He shook himself and stood up and looked up at the stands. Then he turned on his heel and ran from the arena. For some reason, Katsuki was reminded strongly of Deku. Izuku was watching the same match intently. He couldn't help noticing how in the moment before he was consumed by a blast of steam and fire, when a vine had grabbed him by the wrist, Todoroki's eyes were suddenly fearful. What is he afraid of? Why had just being caught by the wrist elicited such a reaction from him? The cameraman gave him his answer. Endeavor. A cut to the stands showed the number 2 hero watching his son flee the ring, looking absolutely livid. Suddenly, Izuku was angry. No, he was said. Endeavor was hurting his kid, there was no other explanation. He pictured Shuto Todoroki's face. The fear when he'd looked up at the stands, at his father. Righteous fury rose up inside him. How dare that so-called hero? It takes years of suffering to make someone who was normally so composed react like that. He had to do something. Maybe he could come up with a plan to... Something wrong, Ghost? Tamura's voice from behind him made Izuku jump. Aren't you supposed to be finding weaknesses for those annoying UA students? He stared down hard at his notebook and tried to keep himself from shaking. Yeah, I was just thinking about how to phrase this. Taking a deep breath, he jotted down a note at the bottom of Shuto Todoroki's page. Weaknesses, fears his father and his own fire quirk. Vulnerable after he's been forced to use it. Reacts irrationally when seized by the arm. He set down his pencil and leaned back in his chair to watch the next match. The boy with the engine quirk beat his pink classmate with the acid quirk pretty easily. He basically just steered her out of bounds. He was interested to see the Brainwasher's next match, but it was a poor matchup for him. He was up against Tokoyami, who was so stoic that Shinso would never be able to get a response in time to stop Dark Shadow from punching him out of bounds. Next was Kaken versus the boy with the hardening quirk. Kaken threw a punch, but, oh wow, that was interesting, Kirishima's quirk rendered him completely immune to Kaken's. Suddenly, Kaken was on the defensive, ducking and dodging from his classmates' relentless attacks. The two of them danced like that around the arena for some time, and then, Kaken landed a hit. And then another. It seemed to be working now. Did he have some kind of time limit on his quirk? He must, because in a few seconds Kaken knocked him out. Izuku added a note on the time limit to Kirishima's page. That made the final 4 Todoroki, Ida, Tokoyami, and Kaken. The semi-finals went about how Izuku expected, with a few surprises. Todoroki was still using only his ice powers as he cut off his opponent on both sides, and although Ida managed to get a hit in when he kicked his engine into overdrive, he still lost when his opponent froze his muffler. Kaken fought hard, refusing to let up against Tokoyami's powerful quirk, but for some reason, Kaken's attacks were doing better than his previous opponents. Perhaps Dark Shadow was somehow vulnerable to attacks that give off light? Whatever it was, it didn't take long for Kaken to pin him to the ground. Present Mick's voice came from the tinny TV speakers. That means our final fight will be between Todoroki and Bakugo. Katsuki scowled at nothing in particular as he walked through the hallway that led to the waiting rooms, thinking. Something was seriously bothering Icy Hot, he could tell. And whatever it was, he was half-butting the whole tournament because of it. He huffed angrily and shoved his fists in his pockets. Doesn't that half-and-half a-hole realize what he's doing? It's a f-and insult to everyone who's out here giving their all. He thought of Uraraka. How she'd faced him with such ferocity. She wasn't an idiot, she knew she had almost no chance, but she tried her diamond hardest anyway. Because anything less is unacceptable. I wonder what Deku would say to him. His old classmate had always been better at all that feelings crap. The thought of him made Katsuki stop walking, and he squeezed his fists hard in his pockets. He could feel the neat, thin little scar that crossed each palm. He squeezed his eyes shut, and he could see green eyes floating in the dark, first the cold, angry, empty ones that had been inches from his, the ones that had almost killed him, then the frightened, sad, shocked ones that had decided to let him live. A wave of fury that turned into a shout rushed over him, and he punched the wall beside him, leaving a black scorch mark. There was no two ways about it, no other angle for it, no matter how many times he told himself he'd been caught by surprise or he wasn't giving his all because he hadn't expected the villain in the hoodie to be any good, there was still the same unavoidable truth staring him in the face. Deku beat him. Deku kicked his butt, Deku took him down in seconds, and, judging by all the information he'd found on Ghost, if he hadn't decided he felt bad about it, Deku would absolutely have killed him. Katsuki set his jaw. He wasn't going to lose again. He was going to win the UA Sports Festival, and he was going to show everyone he wasn't afraid. He stalked over to his waiting room and kicked open the door. He froze when he saw it was occupied. by Icy Hot. Hey, what the hell are you doing here? This is my space to dash, he checked the sign. He must not have noticed with thoughts of Deku distracting him. Crap, this is waiting room number 2? Half and Half gave him a sidelong look, then went back to staring down at the table in front of him. What, was he really not worth the time? Oh. Alright, fine, so I may have walked into the wrong room, but don't think that means I'm not gonna be on top of my game, you got that? His left palm sparked as he slammed it down on the table. You better bring all you got to this, Icy Hot. The explosion made Half and Half jump, and mismatched eyes looked his way with an unreadable expression. Look, I don't know what the hell is up with you, but whatever it is, none of that crap matters now, he went on. Just make sure you don't hold back. Because you owe it to yourself and to me and to everyone out there to give it your all. Anything less is an insult. Icy Hot blinked at him, looking somewhat surprised, then looked away. He scowled. Use your flames on me, he demanded, then turned and threw his last words over his shoulder. I want everyone to know I beat you at your best. He slammed the door behind him. Izuku was sitting cross-legged in his chair now, watching intently as Kaken and Shudo Todoroki squared up to fight each other. This was going to be interesting. Present Mike gave the signal, and the first to strike was Todoroki. He unleashed a massive barrage of ice, but it wasn't like his attack in the first round. It was slower, more controlled. He was being cautious. There were muffled bangs coming from the tinny speakers and the camera shook slightly, then Kaken burst out of the ice. He threw himself at Todoroki, who reached for him with his right hand when oh wow. He used a small explosion to change his direction in midair and seized his opponent by the shoulder and the back of the head, then threw him across the ring. Todoroki caught himself with a wave of ice to avoid going out of bounds. Kaken attacked again, and Todoroki reached up and grabbed with his left hand. He seemed to pause for a moment. Would he finally use his fire for the final match? But something seemed to stop him, and he simply used Kaken's momentum to toss him aside. Kaken looked sad. It was impossible to pick up what he was saying, but Izuku could guess. Kaken had probably taken his opponent's refusal to use his fire quirk as a personal insult, like Todoroki was underestimating him. It was kind of cocky to assume that you can win, even when handicapping yourself on purpose. He watched with bated breath as Todoroki closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The frost creeping across his right arm and leg started to melt away, and then, flames lit up across his left arm and from his left eye. He straightened himself up and stood tall, and Kaken grinned. Then, he took a running jump and started to spin himself through the air with small explosions that gradually got bigger. He began spinning so fast through the air that he was near impossible to see as he flew towards Todoroki, who raised his left hand, wreathed in flames. The next second was almost too fast to see. Kaken's hand closed around Todoroki's left wrist, and he froze. The flames died. And then he disappeared in a huge explosion. The smoke cleared. Todoroki was slumped, unconscious on a mountain of ice, and he was out of bounds. Kaken stood. He staggered toward his opponent, looking angry, but something else too. He ran the rest of the way out of the ring and seized the unconscious Todoroki by the shirt. He was shouting something unintelligible, and he almost looked like he was about to cry. The umpire, Midnight, knocked out the furious Kaken with her quirk's gas. She stared at the two students for a moment, then raised a hand in the air. Todoroki is out of bounds. That means Bakugo is the winner. Izuku turned off the TV. Izuku leaned against the wall, lurking in the shadowy corner of the bar while Tamura and Kurogiri tried to win over Stain, the infamous hero killer. You must be the ones who attacked Yue. And you want to recruit me to build up your little group again. Stain was staring down Tamura, looking unimpressed. It'll be great, you have so much experience, Tamura was saying. He sounded almost excited. Stain raised an eyebrow. And what is your mission? For now, I really just want to kill All Might. I like to destroy anything that pisses me off. His tone made Izuku cringe. Stain narrowed his eyes. I was a fool to think you could offer me anything. It turns out you're the type of person I hate most in this world. He reached for his knives as he continued, the goals of this league are that of a child. Privately, Izuku agreed. Even though Tamura was almost 10 years older than him, the man behaved like a child throwing tantrums. What meaning is there to killing if you don't have real convictions? Kurojiiri addressed the monitor. Master, should I step in? Let it happen. Sensei's sweet, icy voice never failed to send chills down Izuku's spine. It's possible this is the only way he'll learn anything. He needs to think about the ways he must grow, how he can mature. Only then will he reach his potential. You would do well to learn from young Izuku, Tamura. Izuku stiffened as Sensei addressed him by name, and Tamura shot him a look of pure loathing. He stared straight at the floor in front of him and swallowed hard. There was a blur of movement, a thud, and when Izuku looked up, he saw that Stain had knocked Tamura to the floor, and he had a knife buried in his shoulder. So you want me to be a part of your crumbling little league. But you won't accomplish anything if you don't have conviction and desire. Without those, you'll always be an aimless weakling, achieving nothing. That's how you got here. Tamura was breathing hard as he glared up at him. Hey now, you're being a little bit rough, aren't you? Kurojiiri, take this guy back. But Kurojiiri didn't move, and Izuku could see he was bleeding from a shallow cut on his arm. I'm sorry. I can't move. It must be the hero killer's quirk at work. So Stain had some kind of paralysis quirk, somehow activated by cutting someone. Briefly, Izuku wondered if blood type had any effect on it. The word hero has lost all meaning in this society. The world is overrun by fakes and criminals like you who chase petty dreams. They must all be purged. Stain slid one of his knives closer to Tamura's neck, who grabbed the blade in his free hand. What do you think you're doing? The knife started to rust before their eyes under Tamura's touch. You touch this palm and I'll kill you. You sure talk a lot, hero killer. Conviction? Maybe I don't have anything as loaded as that. The knife turned to dust in his grasp. If I had to choose a desire though, it would be killing All Might. A wild glint was in his eye now. If this world wants to worship trash like him, I'll destroy their beloved symbol of peace and then crush them while they're in shock. He reached for Stain, who leapt backwards out of range. Tamura stood. The last of my injuries was finally about to finish healing, and now this. You should learn not to play with knives. We don't have a healer in our party, you know. Stain looked him up and down. I see your nature. It seems our goals fundamentally oppose each other. However, this wasn't in vain. We agree that we need to destroy the present. Tamura scratched at his neck. I'm over this. Drop dead. I'm the kind of person you hate most, right? I was testing your motives, Stain explained, sheathing the knife that hadn't been turned to a pile of rust. People always show their true colors when on the verge of death. There was a pause. It's abnormal, but there is desire, a warped sprout of conviction in you. How will it bloom? In the end, I wonder? So maybe I'll let you grow. If you don't turn out well, I'll take care of you later. Tamura narrowed his eyes. You think you could get rid of me? Kurojiiri seemed to get control of his body back, and he went on, Kurojiiri, someone as crazy as this will be nothing but a problem for the League of Villains. Please reconsider, said Kurojiiri. This man will be a great asset if he joins us. I'd say this was a success. My business here is done, Stain interrupted. Now you will return me to Hosu. There are still several false heroes I must attend to there. A warp gate appeared behind him, and without another word, the hero killer disappeared through it. The moment he was gone, Tamura turned to Izuku. Ghost, I've got a job for you. Then he scowled in the direction of the closing warp gate. I need you to take out the hero killer. That night, Izuku prowled the dark streets and back alleys of Hosu City. A large amount of fire and smoke were pouring from some buildings a few blocks away, but he ignored them. Whatever Tamura's crazy plan was, he wanted no part of it, especially if something happened and it went south. The newest wound Tamura had given him after the resounding failure at the USJ had only just healed. He just had to stay focused on his mission. Find the hero killer and take him down. He heard some shouting from an alley to his left and he paused. Approaching slowly, he drew 4 of his throwing knives from his belt, 2 in each hand. Say whatever you want to about me. You're still just a criminal who hurt my brother. The speaker appeared to be a boy around his age in a hero costume, probably a student, and standing over him, holding a sword dripping blood, was Stain. Judging by the style of the armor and the brother comment, he figured the kid must be related to the turbo hero, Ingenium, who'd been injured so badly by Stain a few days prior that he wouldn't be able to continue working as a hero. From where he stood in the shadows, Izuku took careful aim, then let his knives fly. One knife caught Stain's scarf, another caught his left sleeve near the wrist, and two caught his right sleeve. The hero killer was pinned to the wall of the alley, looking around wildly for the source of the attack. Izuku stepped out of the shadows. Attacking children now, are we, Stain? Stain stared at him. You must be Ghost. You're with that brat, right? I should have known he'd try something underhanded. Who's there? Izuku ignored the boy on the ground, and stepped over his motionless form towards Stain, drawing his swords. Really, nothing personal, hero killer, but I have a job to do. Stain snarled. He tore his left arm free, and threw a jagged-edged knife, but Izuku knocked it out of the air with a casual swing of his sword. There is only one man I'll let kill me. He is a true hero. All Might is Dash. Cut it with the fanaticism, will you? Izuku interrupted. All Might isn't a god, and he's not a true hero either. Venom dripped from his voice, and Stain blinked at him in surprise. All Might is just like everyone else. Only in it for money and power, and only saving people when it's convenient for him, he went on, and his voice started shaking as years of buried anger rose up inside him. I worshipped All Might for years, probably almost as much as you do. But when the time came, when I needed him, he chose to leave me to my fate. He didn't even try. Tell me, Stain, does that sound like a true hero to you? Stain opened his mouth to reply, but broke off with a hiss of pain when Izuku drove the end of his sword into his shoulder. A murderous glint appeared in Stain's eyes, and the villain twisted and aimed a solid kick to the stomach with his heavy, spiked boot. He reeled backwards, coughing, and Stain tore himself free from the rest of the knives, pinning him to the wall. Izuku dove to his left to avoid a thrown knife, and rolled to his feet. I shouldn't have let myself get distracted. I should have killed him while I had him restrained. He ducked two more blades. If I get cut, I'm dead. Stain stalked toward him. You're pretty good, Ghost. Seems almost a shame to kill you. There was a flash of steel, and Izuku crossed his swords in front of him to block the hero killer's jagged blade. As he gave his own swords a sharp twist, Stain's flew through the air and clattered to the ground behind him. The hero killer's eyes went wide behind his mask, and he took a step back, drawing his last dagger. No. The hero killer is mine. Oh yeah, there was a kid here. He had to finish this fast. He flipped his sword in his hand and threw himself at Stain. He felt a familiar slight resistance as his blade sank deep into Stain's stomach. For a few seconds, the hero killer's eyes were wild with sudden fear. And then they were empty. He pulled his sword out with an unsettling squelch, and Stain collapsed to the ground. But with Stain dead, he now had to deal with the kid who'd been immobilized by his quirk. He had pulled himself up to a sitting position and was staring with numb shock at Izuku. Oh, you killed him. He sheathed his swords and began gathering his throwing knives to return them to his belt. He sighed. Yep. But I was going to dash. You've never killed anyone before, have you? The boy stared at him. No. Izuku threw his last words over his shoulder as he turned to climb the fire escape. But don't. A few weeks had passed since Izuku had killed Stain. Apparently, the heroes were the first to get to his body, because the police had issued a story claiming Stain had been taken down by Endeavor. It made sense. They probably didn't want the general public knowing the biggest threat to hero society was taken down by a wanted assassin. Still, he was annoyed that fiery BSTRD would be getting all the credit for his dirty work. Being killed hadn't stopped Stain from becoming an internet sensation, and soon villains everywhere were spouting his crazy ideologies. This had made Tamura angry. So angry, in fact, that Izuku had a new handprint of raw, cracked skin on his shoulder to show for it. Never mind that he'd done his job just fine. It wasn't his fault everyone was obsessed with Stain. But Sensei said they had to use Stain's popularity to their advantage, and recruit those who wish to carry out his will. So that's what they were doing now. Izuku was leaning against the wall in the corner of the bar. Two potential new recruits were here. One of them was a girl his age in a school uniform wielding knives, and the other was a man with extensive burn scarring and stitches on his face and chest. They both were talking to Tamura. The girl introduced herself first. "Himiko Toga here. I just want to make it easier to live in this dumb world. And I want to meet Ghosty. They told me he was here with you." Where is Dash? She caught sight of Izuku and the swords at his hip, and her eyes went wide. He wasn't wearing his mask and he didn't have his hood up, so his face was plainly visible. "Oh, it's you." The look in her eyes made his skin crawl, and she smiled widely, revealing sharply pointed canines. She sidestepped around Tamura, who was looking seriously annoyed, and skipped towards him. "Oh wow, I never thought you would be this cute." Izuku flushed. What the hell was with this girl? "I've been reading about you. You're the one who killed Mr. Stain, why aren't you?" He stiffened, then nodded slowly. "How did she know that? What's your name?" She was leaning in closer and closer as she spoke. He swallowed hard. I'm Izuku." He mumbled. She giggled. "Why no. I think I'll call you Zuzu." There was an odd gleam in her eyes. "I'm Himiko Toga, but you can call me Miko." He shrank against the wall. Was this girl crazy? She leaned in until she was so close he could feel her breath against his neck, and closed her eyes, breathing deep through her nose. She opened her eyes and looked right into his. "You smell nice, Zuzu. I just love the smell of blood." He froze. Could she really smell blood on him? He shivered. It was true he had taken out a target on Tamura's orders this morning. Could she tell somehow? The man with the burn scars was saying something, but his head was spinning too much to be able to hear. Toga gently, almost lovingly, ran her fingers up and down the blade of her knife. He opened his mouth to say something, but her next words made him stop dead. "Hey Zuzu? Will you cut me if I cut you?" She grinned with a wild, hungry glint in her eye, and her blade flashed toward him. Izuku's vision went red. He couldn't see, he couldn't think, he just moved. He pushed and pulled and twisted, and then suddenly he was kneeling on the ground over Toga, who was pinned face down on the floor, and he had the hand that held her knife twisted painfully behind her back. "All right, Ghost, that's enough." Tamura's voice brought him back to his senses. He blinked and sat up, releasing her wrist. Toga looked up at him, her eyes wide and full of childish wonder. "Wow, Zuzu! You're amazing!" The odd gleam returned, and her smile turned sinister. "You'll be so much fun to play with." Then, without another word, she got to her feet and twirled to face Tamura. "So what do you say, handyman? Can I please join your League of Villains?" Izuku bent over his notebooks, trying to ignore Toga dancing around the room behind him. Tamura wanted him to make a plan to capture Kaken from Yue's summer training camp in the woods. When he asked what they wanted Kaken for, Tamura said it was because he wanted to recruit him. It had been hard for Izuku to keep from laughing out loud. Really, of all Tamura's crazy, dumb schemes, this one was the stupidest. Kaken would never turn on the heroes. But nothing he said would convince Tamura that Kaken would never change, so here he was, making the plan anyway. At least with a smaller, more skilled team, this would probably go better than the fiasco at the USJ. He was suddenly aware of someone hovering at his shoulder. He sighed. "Toga, please. I can't think." She giggled from behind him. "Come on, Zuzu, didn't I tell you to call me Miko?" She had, of course, at least 3 times, but he had already decided that he would absolutely not be doing that. It would only encourage her creepy crush on him. He shivered, then turned back to his notebooks. The only chance they had of taking any students from the camp, let alone Kaken, was Mr. Compress, who could capture and restrain anyone just a touch. That, combined with twice making body doubles of Dabi to distract the pros, was the key to this plan being a success, although he could only guess at what would happen once they actually got Kaken here. And none of his guesses were good. We found out that the villains are here to capture a student. Katsuki Bakugo, if you can hear me, please try to avoid combat and return to camp as soon as possible. Mandalay's voice rang in Katsuki's head as he and Icy Hot dove in opposite directions to avoid the gross villain's weird teeth. He rolled behind a bush to get some cover so he'd get a chance to think. He'd spotted Deku's gray hoodie and dual swords among the crowd at the USJ attack, but he hadn't gotten a chance to talk to him, and he escaped with Shigaraki. He hadn't told anyone yet that he'd seen his old friend a few months ago, because if it got out he was involved with the League of Villains, Katsuki feared it would ruin his chances of ever being a hero. He had been determined to find Deku again and talk to him after the USJ. He strongly suspected that the villains were holding him against his will, but there was basically no concrete information about his villain identity available on the internet to confirm that. All anyone seemed to know about him was he was an incredibly skilled assassin, fought with no visible quirk, although anyone on the internet who even suggested he might be quirkless was immediately shut down, and was known only as Ghost. He desperately wanted to apologize to his old friend, and to tell him they had all been wrong about him. Guilt gnawed at him constantly. He wanted to make up for every awful thing he'd said and done to him. He wanted to help him become a hero. If the League of Villains wanted to capture him, it was probably his best chance at finding Deku. Hell, he was probably somehow involved in this plan. With a grimace, he made his decision. He was going to let himself get captured, and then he was going to get Deku the hell out of there. As the villains strapped him down in the bar and bound his hands, Katsuki was starting to think he'd miscalculated. He didn't see Deku anywhere, and now he was restrained and surrounded by the enemy. He barely listened as Shigaraki monologued about society and fairness. It set him off more than anything. Okay, sure, he had anger issues, and the worst of it had been broadcast on national television during the sports festival, but that didn't make him anything like them. Go jump in a lake, he growled, trying to make his fear sound more like annoyance. Shigaraki hissed at him before stalking off into the next room. Katsuki went back to trying to come up with some kind of desperate plan, before an all-too-familiar voice caught his attention from the direction Shigaraki went. I'm sorry, I thought Dash. You told me this would work. Craning his neck, Katsuki could see through the open door to his left that Shigaraki was looming over Deku, who wore a terrified expression that Katsuki knew all too well. He wasn't wearing his hoodie, instead he had on a ratty tank top that revealed his arms and chest were covered in scars. Some were slashes from knives, varying from fresh purplish-red ones to old, fading white ones, while others were pitted, pale pink, and clearly hand-shaped. I told you I didn't think he'd ever turn on the heroes. Deku started to defend himself, but defiance failed him as Shigaraki raised a hand and twitched his fingers threateningly, and he cowered in terror. The image was painfully familiar and Katsuki looked away. But a piercing scream made him jerk his head back around. Shigaraki had seized Deku's upper arm with all 5 fingers. Skin was beginning to crack and blister under the villain's touch, and he screamed and begged for mercy. Imsuri, please Dash. Tamura Shigaraki, the warp villain boomed in warning, and reluctantly, Shigaraki let go. Deku collapsed on the floor, cradling his raw, bleeding arm. Shaking, he pulled himself to his knees with his uninjured arm and looked up at the 2 villains. Let me talk to him. Alone. I can convince him, and if I can't, I'll kill him. Deku's words made Katsuki's blood run cold. Green eyes looked his way, and he quickly turned away before he was caught watching. A few minutes later, the remaining villains filed out of the bar, and he was left alone. Then, Deku came in and closed the door behind him. He had his belt of knives on now, and a fresh bandage on his upper arm. He crossed his arms and narrowed his eyes at Katsuki. Kaken. Deku. The other boy stiffened. Don't call me that, he muttered. So what's the deal? I know you let yourself get captured. This caught Katsuki off guard. You did. There weren't nearly enough burns. I know what you can do, he said in a matter-of-fact tone. There was a long silence. So, what do you want me to call you? Katsuki tried after a while. His old classmate blinked. You could try my name? What? Izuku? A smile twitched at the corners of his mouth, but Izuku said nothing. We all missed you after you went missing, you know. No response. He tried again. We were all wrong about you. We all thought you were weak, but you ended up stronger than any of us. We were wrong. He shifted awkwardly. God, he was bad at this being nice sheet. I was wrong. About you. I think you can still be a hero. At this, Izuku suddenly drew one of his swords and a shadow crossed his face. I don't want to be a hero anymore, he hissed through clenched teeth. Katsuki opened his mouth to say something, but closed it again as Izuku continued, shouting now. Where were the heroes when I needed them, huh? Where were they when I was suffering? Where were the heroes when I needed saving from you? He swung his sword clean through the leg of an upturned barstool and the blade stopped inches from Katsuki's face. The barstool's leg clattered to the floor. He stood like that for a moment, breathless, his face flushed and twisted with rage. And where were they for all this time? His voice started to break as tears began to fall, and the hand holding his sword was shaking now. Why didn't they come save me? I've been hoping and praying for years that a hero would come and take me away. But I'm too far gone now. It's too late. I'm a wanted criminal across the whole country. If anything happens, I'm not getting rescued. I'm gonna end up in jail. And I should be. He lowered his sword and turned away. The words were spilling out of his mouth now, much too fast for him to stop them, and the sight of him like this made Katsuki's chest ache. I'm dangerous, Kaken. I've hurt people. I've killed people. I'm so scared, all the time, and I can't get away. I can't get away because they'll just find me, especially now that Sensei has Ragdoll's quirk, and even if I do get away I can't just go home, they'll kill me and Mom, and I just want it to stop, just please make it stop dash. His sword clattered to the ground as he clamped both hands over his ears and sank to his knees, shoulders heaving as he started to breathe faster, shallower. Katsuki stared, helpless, as a full-blown panic attack gripped his old friend. He had never seen him like this. He'd never seen anyone like this. This wasn't like when they'd fought back in primary school, when he'd cried after being pushed down. This was clearly something else entirely. His breath was coming in short gasps and he was shaking like a leaf. Oh man, Katsuki was absolutely not the right person for this. Comforting people was more Kirishima or Uraraka's specialty. He had never been good at finding the right words. Hey, it'll be okay. Take deep breaths, he tried awkwardly, wishing he wasn't strapped to the chair. Listen. I let them take me because I wanted to get you out of here. At this, Izuku's tears quieted, but he still did not turn back around. He continued, for now just pretend everything's normal, but be ready. We're going to get the hell out of here, together, and when we do, I'll talk to the police. I won't let them just throw you in jail, I swear. This seemed to calm him, and he collected his fallen sword, and stood. Their eyes met, and then Izuku sheathed his sword, and went into the next room where the villains were waiting. Katsuki heard him say, I think he's at least willing to listen, before the door closed behind him. A long, slow, half-hour passed before the villains filed back into the bar. Izuku was among them, wearing his hoodie and mask now. Actually, all the villains appeared to be back in full costume. Somebody unbound his hands and Katsuki rubbed at his sore wrists. One of the villains spoke. I do apologize for such forceful methods, but please understand that we're not some unruly mob committing crimes without a third act in mind. We didn't kidnap you by accident. Even though our backgrounds are different, everyone here has suffered. Shigaraki said with a small smile. Because of people, rules, and heroes who try to hold us back. I'm sure you're the same. Katsuki stood, and then he launched at Shigaraki with an explosion. I'm done listening to your endless talking. Can you not get to the point, or do you just like the sound of your own voice? Basically what you're saying is you want to cause some trouble and you want me to join you. He locked eyes with Deku, who was staring at him with wide, shocked eyes. He looked back at Shigaraki. Well, F you. He fell into a fighting stance. I want to be a hero. I want to help people. I want to save people from BSTRDS like you. I want to be like All Might, and that will never change. Do you understand me? I'll never join your League of Beasties. Shigaraki sighed. I wish you would have listened to what I have to say. Your friend here did, and he's making excellent progress as Ghost. Katsuki scowled but didn't respond. He could see Izuku shrinking away from Shigaraki, and he didn't want to end up saying something that would get his old friend hurt. He had to come up with a way out of here. Shigaraki turned to a computer monitor mounted on the wall. Master, lend me your power. Out of the corner of his eye, Katsuki saw Izuku cringe. Whoever this master was, he had to be bad news. Kurogyri, compress, it's time to put him back to sleep. If you want me to listen, then beg, assholes. I've got to get us out of here. If I try to blow them away, I'll hurt him, plus that warp guy is too fast. A knock at the door made everyone in the bar freeze. Hey, anyone order a pizza? The villains exchanged glances for a moment when there was a loud crash and the wall of the bar was blown away. Before anyone knew what had happened, all of the villains, Izuku included, were restrained by woody vines, and All Might was standing over him. The heroes had come for him. Thank God. You must have been scared, but you stayed strong. I'm sorry, you're safe now, young man, said the booming voice of his teacher. Thinking fast, Katsuki leaned in towards All Might. If he didn't do something soon, his old friend would get carted off with the villains, and would probably have another mental breakdown on the way. Listen. The guy with the swords and the hoodie? He's a prisoner here, he's just a kid. You have to help me get him out of here, Katsuki hissed under his breath into All Might's chest. The hero's eyes scanned the room and found Izuku. Something like recognition crossed his face, and he gave a small nod. Shigaraki snarled. Kurogyri, warp over as many as you can. The Nomu, right? There was a pause. What are you waiting for, damn it? I'm sorry, Tamura Shigaraki, came the warp villain's response. The Nomu were supposed to be in a fixed location, but they're gone. All Might smiled triumphantly. It seems you have a lot to learn, Tamura Shigaraki. You're still green. Your little league underestimated all of us. The soul of this young man, the police's diligent investigation, and our righteous fury. Enough is enough, he declared. Your game has come to an end, Tamura Shigaraki. Shigaraki froze. No. This is not over. The game is still mine. You'll tell us where your boss is right now, All Might demanded. This is your fault. I hate you. Then, everything happened at once. Katsuki turned to see Izuku and the rest of the villains disappearing into some kind of weird slime while Nomu began to appear in their places. The two boys locked eyes. Izuku seemed to know exactly what was happening, and whatever it was terrifying him. Too late, Katsuki felt slime creeping across his own body. Get it dash, slime filled his eyes, nose, and mouth. Memories of being trapped in the sludge villain's weird body came unbidden as terror gripped him, but just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Katsuki fell, choking and coughing, to his hands and knees, before looking up at a nightmare. Izuku stood only a few meters from him, and they were both facing a man without a face, wearing a dark suit and a respirator mask. Izuku was visibly trembling, and he didn't take his eyes off his worn red shoes. Sensei! Izuku! The boss villain approached him and shook his head sadly. It seems that once again All Might has chosen to save your old tormentor after he abandoned you. He placed his hand on Izuku's shoulder and he winced. Oh, did Tamura hurt you again? I'll have to reprimand him. I am here for you. The villain's hand glowed with a gold halo as he gently held it to Izuku's arm. With a shudder, he relaxed slightly as his pain lessened. The villain's soft, soothing voice sent chills down Katsuki's spine. It was impossible to read his old classmate's face as he stared at the ground. There you are. The villain stepped back from the two boys and turned. He raised his hands just in time to casually catch All Might's fists in his hands as the #1 hero came swooping down from the skies. I'll have you return the children you stole, all for one. Have you come to kill me a second time, All Might? The rest of the villains appeared out of the slimy portals around Katsuki and Izuku. All Might came soaring down from the skies, but it seemed to take the boss villain very little effort to hold him back. A shockwave blasted from the two of them, and All Might flew backwards. All Might! Oh God, was he okay? Don't you worry. It'll take much more than that to kill him. Izuku Tamura, get off the battlefield and take that child with you. With a wave of his hand, the boss villain shot sinister-looking red and black tendrils into the chest of the unconscious warp villain and forcibly activated his quirk. Before he had time to work out any kind of plan, Katsuki found himself surrounded by villains, and he was suddenly ducking and dodging and fighting as hard as he could just to avoid being captured again. Now that a warp gate was open, it would only take one misstep to allow one of the villains to drag him through it. Izuku turned to face him, hood pulled up now, and drew his swords. Katsuki's heart sank. A bang came from behind them. All Might was fighting the boss villain, but he wasn't using the full extent of his power. It's because I'm here. Damn it. He can't go all out unless I get out of the way. But now Izuku was rushing toward him. His eyes were hidden in shadows as he lunged, catching him off balance, and pinned him to the ground easily. Wait for my signal and look for an opening. Blast us the hell out of here when I say go, Izuku hissed into his ear. Then he leaned back and allowed Katsuki to throw him off with a small explosion. So he did want to escape together. He was only pretending to fight him. His sigh of relief was cut short as he narrowly dodged a knife from the freaky schoolgirl. Searched for an opening, something to aim for, and his eyes landed on a shock of red and a glint of binocular lenses. There were people up there, on the 5th-floor balcony of a nearby building. He ducked a blast of blue flames and twisted to get a better look. There were 4 of them. Was that a deliberately mistimed strike from Izuku blocked the magician guy from compressing him again? It couldn't be. Kirishima? He didn't get a chance to check again, because Izuku wrapped his arms around him and crossed his swords behind his back to hold on. Go now. Katsuki didn't need telling twice. With the biggest blast he could muster from both hands, he launched the 2 of them into the sky towards the balcony. Drawing closer, Katsuki saw it was indeed Kirishima, and he'd brought a few of their other classmates. Too late, he realized they were going to fall short. He hadn't accounted for the extra weight, and now they were falling fast. But something caught them before they fell. It was a grapple, courtesy of Yaoyorozu, coming from the balcony. Izuku and Katsuki were wrapped up in the rope together, with Izuku's arms pinned behind Katsuki's back and his face smushed awkwardly into Katsuki's chest. They hung there together for a long moment as both of them tried to catch their breath. Then, the rope holding them jerked as they were hauled up onto the balcony. Katsuki looked up and saw that the rope was being pulled up by Kirishima, Ida, Yaoyorozu, and Todoroki. The second his feet touched the ground, Izuku cut himself free in one smooth motion and turned to face the students, swords ready. Before Katsuki could explain anything, Kirishima activated his quirk and charged Izuku, and in seconds the redhead was flat on his back with Izuku standing over him, panting. A flash of ice came from Todoroki, and Izuku was immobilized. Stop it, Katsuki bellowed, placing himself between his old friend and his classmates. Please, I can explain dash. That little creep was at the ish. Kirishima began from where he sat on the ground, rubbing his sore shoulder, but Katsuki cut him off. He's my friend. They kidnapped him too. 6 years ago. Silence fell, and the students exchanged glances. Todoroki stepped forward so he was face to face with Izuku and he studied him for a moment. His hood and mask had fallen away, and their eyes met. He reached up with his left hand and began thawing the ice prison without saying a word. Gently his fingers lingered over the angry purplish-red scar that crossed his freckled face. Then he stepped back. Izuku dropped his swords and slowly raised his hands in surrender. Katsuki extended a hand to help Kirishima to his feet and was wrapped up in a strong armed hug before he could protest. Kirishima stepped back to, "Good to have you back, bro." Katsuki smiled. "I can't believe you guys came, stupid ifing thing to do dash." A loud bang came from behind them as all for one leveled another building. "We need to get out of here." Todoroki made an ice ramp to the street below, and the 6 of them slid down. In seconds, they were surrounded by police, and a dozen or so guns were all pointed at Izuku, who blanched. "Wait, please." Katsuki stood protectively in front of his old friend. "I can explain everything. He's not a villain, he's a hostage. His name is Izuku Midoriya, he's 15, and if you look it up I'm sure you'll find he's been missing for 6 years. The officers exchanged glances. "We're going to need you to remove all your weapons." Izuku met Katsuki's eyes and he nodded. "Go ahead. You're gonna be safe now." Slowly, Izuku complied, unfastening his belt of throwing knives and letting it fall to the ground at his feet. Then he pulled 2 knives from each shoe, a pair of long daggers from inside his hoodie, and a dozen more small blades hidden in increasingly unlikely places. When he was done, he was placed in H&D CFFS, and he and the rest of the students were escorted to safety as the block was being evacuated. They came to a halt on the edge of a city square where almost all the evacuees were now huddled around the big screen, playing news coverage of the fight between All Might and All for One that was still raging. Katsuki felt Izuku stop dead beside him, and soon everyone was rooted to the spot by what they saw on the screen. All Might had just taken a direct hit from the boss villain, and when the smoke cleared, All Might had become a thin skeleton of a man with sunken eyes and hollow cheeks. Even his hair hung limp. Suddenly terrified murmurs rose from the crowd. Is he gonna be okay? He's always done it before, surely he can do it again? The murmurs became desperate cries as fear crept over them. All Might had never lost before, not even close. If he couldn't beat this villain, who could? Yeah, even if he looks different, he's still the same All Might. Come on, you can do it. Beat this guy. Now the crowd was cheering, desperately hoping that their words were true. Beside him, Katsuki heard Izuku murmur, "Win this." Looking over, he saw a hard-to-place look in his watery eyes as he stared up at the screen. He turned back to the fight. Beat him. Come on, All Might. Come on, All Might. Izuku spent a long time handcuffed to an uncomfortably hard chair in an empty, harshly lit room. There were no windows and no clock, just a small table and another chair opposite him, so it was hard to be sure just how long he'd been there. A few officers, investigators, and counselors had come to check on him and to interrogate him, but he hadn't been able to bring himself to say much of anything to any of them, and they had all come and gone at least 2 hours ago. Cold steel around his wrists made him shift uncomfortably. He shivered and dug his nails into his palms. Was this it? Was he going to spend the rest of his life in chains? The anxiety that had been creeping up on him for the past few hours suddenly overwhelmed him, and the walls seemed to close in. Izuku's breath came in shallow and fast, and tightness gripped his throat. A knock came at the door that made him jump, and it opened to reveal a shock of blonde hair and red eyes wide with concern. Hey, are you okay? Kaken's presence made the creeping anxiety and tight feeling fade to something more bearable, and Izuku nodded. They wouldn't let me in any sooner. Actually, the only reason they let me in now is 'cause they thought you'd be more likely to talk to someone you know. He looked uncomfortable, which wasn't much of a surprise. Polite conversation had never been one of his strong suits. I'm gonna talk to the teachers, Kaken went on, shoving his hands in his pockets and shifting his weight nervously. I want you to come to UA. I meant it when I said I thought you could still be a hero. Izuku blinked and lowered his gaze. Kaken, I don't know Dash. Can I tell you something? Kaken sat down opposite him at the small table. He looked unsure, like he was having trouble finding the words. Izuku nodded. About a month after you disappeared, everyone kind of decided you were dead. There was a memorial at school and everything. I could never really believe it. Maybe I just felt guilty, 'cause the last thing I'd ever said to you was Dash. Eat sheet and die? Kaken's ears turned red. When I used to call you Deku, it was supposed to be an insult. But after you were gone, I guess it started to mean something else to me. I knew wherever you were, whatever you were doing, you'd never give up. Izuku looked back up at him and saw that he was staring at the table directly in front of him as a few silent tears rolled to the end of his nose before they fell. I missed you. A lot. It always kind of felt like you left a hole behind. You were the only one who really gave a f-dash. Even though we did nothing but cheat on you all the time. Sometimes I wondered if you were happier wherever you were. Since you'd gotten away from us. From me. He looked miserable. Not really, Izuku heard himself answer. Tamura is worse than you ever were. And Sensei. All for one, I mean. He swallowed uncomfortably. He always knew exactly what to say to make me feel however he wanted me to. He told me exactly what I needed to hear. He told me I was strong enough to fight for myself. He told me I didn't need a quirk. And I listened to him. I fought for him. I killed people for him. And then just disappeared. He was hurt badly in a fight with All Might 5 years ago. It's why he's blind. He spent a long time recovering. And without him there, Tomura got worse and worse. Tears started rolling down his face. By the time I realized how horrible they were, I couldn't leave. I couldn't get away. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I swear I didn't. But I was too scared. You aren't a bad person, Kaken murmured. Izuku scoffed. The tears stopped and bitterness replaced them. I wouldn't be so sure if I were you. What do you mean by that? 293. His voice came out hollow. That's my kill count. A long silence followed. 293 people are dead. And that's just the ones I killed myself. Izuku closed his eyes, uncomfortably aware of Kaken staring at him. I'm certainly not a good person either. That wasn't your fault. Just like you said, that boss villain was manipulating you the whole time. And I let him. You were just a kid. You still are. There's no way you can be held accountable for the awful shit they made you do. Izuku couldn't meet his eyes. Besides, Kaken went on, when you found me in that alley, you kicked my butt? It was kind of embarrassing actually. He turned his hands over to stare at his palms, each crossed with a neatly healed scar. I was defenseless. If you'd really wanted to, neither of them wanted to finish the thought, and the two boys avoided each other's gaze. That's how I know you're not a bad person. If you were, well, I don't think I'd still be here. Their eyes met. Kaken looked so sincere. Izuku took a deep breath. Maybe. The sound of the door opening brought them both back to their senses. Both time's up, a voice said from the other side. Kaken stood. I gotta go. Izuku nodded. Hey, Kaken. He paused at the door. If you still wanted to call me Deku, then that's fine with me. His old friend smiled at him from the doorway. Okay. Kaken certainly has changed, he thought as the door shut, leaving him alone once again. Guess we both have All Might. Mr. Aizawa. Katsuki called to his teachers as they walked down his front path after meeting with his parents. Wait. Both of them stopped and turned. He'd been itching to tell them about Deku since they'd arrived, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. He clenched his hands into fists. He had to. He owed it to his old friend. I have something to tell you guys. It's important. Aizawa raised an eyebrow. He took a deep breath and continued. The other hostage, the kid who got away with me? He's my friend, he went missing 6 years ago, and everyone thought he was dead. But he's alive, I saw him at the beginning of the school year. The villains had him the whole time, and they made him into an assassin. They've been making him do all kinds of awful shit, and it's killing him, and... His homeroom teacher blinked at him, and All Might looked horrified. Midoriya. That's his name, isn't it? He nodded. All Might ran his fingers through his hair. There was a missing person case 6 years ago. I had no idea he was still out there. And you're saying he's ghost? It's my fault. Katsuki squeezed his eyes shut hard to keep from crying. It's my fault. He wanted to be a hero so bad, but when we found out he was quirkless, everyone just laughed at him. I laughed at him. I treated him like shit, and told him he could never be anything and then shame he'd kept bottled inside him for 6 years spilled over, and he couldn't keep the tears down anymore. And then he went home that day after I'd kicked his butt for the 50th time, after I told him he would always be nothing, and some goddamn villains showed up and told him he could be something. That's why he went with them. That's how they convinced the kid who always wanted to be a hero to hurt people. Because of me. He swiped a sleeve across his face and looked up into the sunken blue eyes of All Might. That was his fault too. He couldn't get All Might his power back, but he could do this. It was my fault. I have to fix this. He's still that kid who wants to be a hero, I can tell. That's why I have to do this. I can't call myself a hero until I fix what I did to him. I have to do whatever I can to get him into UA. Izuku stared down at his hands. They were wet and sticky with blood. The iron tang filled his nose and bile rose in his throat. You've done well, Izuku. He looked up. All for One stood a few meters away. His respirator mask was gone, and his face showed no sign of injury. He smiled, warmly, kindly even. He extended a hand. Izuku approached him slowly, as if in a daze. At his feet, someone was curled on the ground, shaking and bleeding from deep cuts all over their body. As the figure on the ground rolled over and groaned, he felt his stomach drop. It was Kaken. He took a step back, horrified. "What are you waiting for? You've wanted this for years, haven't you?" Another step back. He lost his footing and fell backwards. I. Don't pretend, Izuku. I know what you really are. I don't dash. You know you want to. Izuku clamped his hands over his ears and screwed his eyes shut, but it didn't do anything to muffle the sweet poison of Sensei's voice. Do it. Kill him. All for One suddenly loomed over him, and his face shifted, changed into the bloody broken mess that he'd found in the wreckage of the fight 5 years ago, all recognizable features destroyed. Then, his body twisted and morphed into Tamura, who towered over him and raised a hand threateningly. "I knew you were too weak to do what needs to be done," he hissed, a wicked glint in his eyes. "I suppose I'll just have to dispose of the two of you myself." No, please, I don't dash." The hand reached down and closed around his throat. "Midoriya. Hey kid, wake up." Izuku awoke so abruptly that he toppled backwards in the chair he was still handcuffed to, and the back of his head smacked against the hard floor. He blinked his eyes open to see the worried face of a uniformed officer looking down at him. "You okay?" It took Izuku several seconds to make himself say, "Yeah, fine. You fell asleep. I'm actually here to take you to your room." He held up a small key, attached to a ring with at least a dozen others of various sizes. "May I?" Izuku closed his eyes and nodded absently. He could still feel a phantom of the burning, blistering pain from Tamura's quirk around his throat. He swallowed. The man unlocked each of his H&D CFFs and helped him to his feet. He rubbed at his wrists and mumbled a "thank you," then followed the man through the door, down a narrow hallway, and around a few corners. They reached a hallway that came to a dead end, and stopped at the second-to-last door. "Here we are," the officer said with a flourish as he opened the door. Izuku found himself in a small room that was bare except for a small bed with thin-looking blankets, a high window with wire-reinforced glass, an analog clock behind a wire cage up on the wall, a small table with 2 fold-out chairs, and a toilet and sink in the corner. "Make yourself comfortable. You've got a visitor coming in about an hour." The door closed and Izuku was alone again. He heaved a deep sigh and collapsed on the bed, which groaned under his weight. He stayed like that for a long time, staring at the ceiling, too tired to stay awake but far too anxious to sleep. The sound of the door opening brought him back to his senses. He sat up. The officer from before poked his head in. "Midoriya? Your visitor is here." The door swung wide to reveal a short, stout woman with dark green hair, a round, kind face, and tired green eyes. She stared at him like she was seeing a ghost. "Izuku." Her voice was barely above a whisper. He stood. "Mom." She started toward him in a daze, like she could hardly believe he was real, and stopped in front of him. He was almost a head taller than her now. She reached up and touched his face gently. Then, suddenly she wrapped him up in a tight hug. The smell of her shampoo filled his nose and he buried his face in her hair. A sudden rush of emotion overwhelmed him. He'd forgotten what home smelled like. How could he have forgotten? A feeling of warm security like he hadn't felt in years enveloped him, and now he was crying into her shoulder. They stayed like that for several minutes, both of them shaking with quiet sobs and holding on to each other for dear life, as if they were each terrified that if they let go for even a second, the other would disappear. Finally, his mother stepped back and looked up at him. "I'm so sorry, Izuku. I should have done more. And now look what they've done to you." Her fingers gently traced the scar that crossed his face. "None of this is your fault, Mom. It's okay." She didn't look like she believed him. "I'm just so glad you're finally safe." The next day, Izuku had another visitor. It was the pro-hero Eraserhead, in full costume, with his goggles hanging loose around his neck. He had a new scar under his eyes since they'd last met. He looked Izuku up and down with mild interest. "I never would have guessed the infamous ghost was a quirkless 15-year-old, he remarked. His tone wasn't the dismissive one he was used to. It seemed Eraserhead respected his skills after they'd fought at the USA. One of my students has told me a lot about you. Actually, he personally went to Principal Nedzu and demanded I see you. Izuku blinked. Kaken really did that for me? Briefly, he pictured Kaken holding the tiny furry principal of UA by the scruff and saying something like, "Listen here, you demon weasel," and he smiled a little. "But we called a staff meeting to discuss your situation, and we are prepared to offer you a place in my class, should you pass the written entrance exam. If you stay at the school in the student dorms, it would allow us to keep you under the supervision of pros while also offering you a chance at an education, as well as the opportunity to pay off your debt to society as a pro hero." Izuku stared at him. A pro hero? Did Eraserhead really think that was possible? Why are you doing this for me? Eraserhead gave a small smile. You've got a good friend, Midoriya. Think about it. Give me your answer by dash. I don't need to think about it, Izuku interrupted, standing up suddenly. I'll do it. Eraserhead smiled wider. Good. I know you usually use swords and knives, so I'll have support start making you some weapons that are a little less lethal. They're very good, I'm sure they'll come up with something you'll like. Izuku stared at him. Thank you. It had been so long since someone had been this nice to him. He felt tears stinging in his eyes and blinked them away, turning red and staring at the floor. He looked up at the pro hero in front of him. Thank you, Eraserhead. It's Aizawa. I look forward to teaching you, Midoriya. He turned and tossed the last words over his shoulder, then disappeared through the door, which closed behind him with a snap. On the third day, his visitor was All Might. The former pro looked small, fragile, sickly even, but his sunken eyes were still an unmistakable electric blue. 6 years ago, he would have fallen all over himself and scrambled for a pen to get an autograph, but now he couldn't help but hear All for One's voice echo in his head. All Might had abandoned him, hadn't he? All Might sat down at the little table and cleared his throat. Young man, he began. It has been brought to my attention that I owe you an apology. Izuku looked up, surprised. 6 years ago, your mother personally came to my agency and begged me to try and find you. He broke off, looking ashamed of himself. I told her there was nothing we could do. You had disappeared over 2 months ago with no trace or sign of a struggle, there were no leads, and most villains don't keep hostages for more than a week or two. So I told her that she needed to move on. It's my fault everyone stopped looking for you. I'm sorry. Izuku stared at him. Whatever he'd been expecting All Might to say, that wasn't it. All Might continued, I know you spent a lot of time with All for One. I assume he told you about One for All? Yes, Izuku answered. I know that Nana Shimura, Tamura's grandmother, passed the power on to you. All Might suddenly paled. So that was true? He really is her grandson? His voice was hoarse and hollow. Izuku nodded. His real name is Tenko Shimura. I saw what San All for One did to you 5 years ago, and I know you've been losing power fast ever since. I also know that your time using One for All is pretty much up, but you still haven't chosen anyone to pass it on to. And if you don't do it soon, the power will die with you. He had a funny feeling he knew where this conversation was going. All Might stared at him for a moment, taken aback. Yes, that is true, he said finally. I wanted to ask you dash. No. All Might froze. I'm sorry and thank you, but no. Izuku stood. I am Quirkless. It took me a long time and a lot of suffering to get to a place where I can say that and feel proud. I don't want or need a quirk to reach my goal. I can do it with my own strength. He stared at his hand in front of him and clenched it into a fist. Being quirkless is part of who I am, and I'm not ashamed of it anymore. Besides, I've been given quirks before, and it's not something I'm eager to repeat. I hope you understand. All Might stared at him for a moment, then let out a long, slow breath. That's a very brave thing to say. I respect that, young Midoriya. You know, I was quirkless myself once upon a time. I suppose I will be again soon. Really? It was hard to reconcile the image of All Might in his head with the word, quirkless. But I never managed to be strong enough to take down villains until I met my predecessor. You've done what I never could. Has it occurred to you that if you go pro, you'll be the first Quirkless person to receive a license? You could inspire a lot of people. Izuku stared at him, and he felt a smile spread slowly across his face despite himself. All Might stood and smiled back at him. I'll be rooting for you, kid. Mr. Aizawa came to visit Izuku again on the 4th day after his escape. He was carrying a folder which held Yue's written entrance exam and a few other official documents, as well as an important-looking metal case. He dropped off the test and left to give Izuku time to complete it. It wasn't particularly difficult, and he was finished within a half hour. Mr. Aizawa came back when he was done, looked over his answers and nodded approvingly, then replaced the test papers in his folder. Very good. I've already arranged for you to be released into the custody of UA faculty today. We can move you into the student dorm and introduce you to your new classmates. They all settled in 2 days ago. We're currently working on preparing for the Provisional Hero Licensing exam. I'm sure you'll catch on fast. In the meantime, though, I wanted to show you these. He set the case down on the small table in front of Izuku and popped both latches. Inside, there was a pair of short black handles, a belt full of 2 types of darts, and a wrist device that looked like it held a grappling hook. Folded at the bottom, there was something made of green fabric. Wordlessly, Izuku unfolded it and held it up. It was a hoodie, like his old one, but smaller and more streamlined. It looked like it would actually fit him properly. It was covered in at least a dozen hidden pockets with simple black geometric details around the shoulder, arms, and chest. A hero costume of his very own. He swiped a forearm across his face hastily to hide his tears. He folded the jacket and replaced it in the case. Then, curiously, he picked up the 2 black handles. They fit perfectly in his hands. Give them a shake, Aizawa prompted, and Izuku flicked them both. Out of the handles slid 2 collapsible batons made of smooth black carbon fiber, each the exact weight and length of the swords he was used to. There was a band of silver 2 inches wide around the center of each one, and a button by each handle. He pressed one. The end of the baton suddenly crackled with electricity. He felt his face split into a wide grin. He gave each baton a spin, feeling their weight in his hands. They felt familiar. The carbon fiber should stand up to Shigaraki's disintegration quirk for at least 20 seconds. The ends work as tasers, and if you cross them at the silver sections, they'll make a small electromagnetic field that mainly functions as a shield. If you do that, you can pull them apart hard to make a shockwave that'll knock back opponents or block projectiles. They're perfect, he murmured. He looked up at Mr. Aizawa. Thank you. He received a small smile in return. The darts are to replace your throwing knives. These, he indicated the larger ones, are for capture. They have special barbs that make them near impossible to remove from solid surfaces, like walls, without knowing how to retract them, so you can use someone's clothes to pin them down. He pulled one of the darts from the belt. It did indeed have 4 long barbs, and he gave a sharp twist, which retracted them. These, he went on, replacing the large dart and pointing to the smaller ones, which had purple fins instead of black, are fast-acting tranquilizers. They last for about half an hour, depending on the person. Izuku switched off his baton and Aizawa showed him how to collapse them back down to the handles. He replaced them in the case and closed it with a snap. Alright, are you ready to go? Katsuki lay in his new dorm room, lost in thought. The sun was beginning to filter through the blinds. He'd have to start getting ready for training soon. At the end of their training the previous day, Aizawa had called the class together for a short meeting. I know there are some rumors flying around about the other hostage recovered from the villain's hideout with Bakugo. I'm here to put those rumors to rest. Tomorrow, I expect you all to be on your best behavior when you meet your new classmate. At this, everyone had all started talking at once. Wasn't he one of the villains from the USJ? The freaky one with the swords? Oh yeah. That guy gave me the creeps. Him. Wait, that villain was our age? Doesn't it seem kind of dangerous to let such a powerful villain into the school? Mr. Aizawa's eyes flashed, and silence fell. Yes, he was at the USJ, and yes, he is a formidable fighter. But I assure you that he will not be a danger to any of you, as long as you are cautious. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I am telling you this now because you need to be made aware of the new student's situation. 6 years ago, he was taken by villains, and since then, they have been forcing him to work for them. As a result, he currently suffers from serious post-traumatic stress. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. This kid has spent many years in constant danger. The one thing that's kept him alive is his reflexes, so it's possible that he may attack without warning if you catch him off guard. I expect all of you to treat your new classmate with respect and to be mindful of his boundaries. That's all, he finished with a wave of his hand as he turned on his heel. Go get some rest. Katsuki had returned to the dorm with everyone else. They were chattering and lively as usual, but when Kirishima invited him to eat with Kaminari and the others, he just couldn't. He couldn't stop thinking about what would happen when Deku arrived. How would his classmates react when they found out he was Quirkless? He was pretty sure nobody in Class 1A was a big enough a-hole to actually bully him over it like in primary school, but he couldn't be sure. He sat up and swung his feet to the floor, deciding that if anyone tried to pick on Deku, they would have to answer to him. It was the least he could do after how he'd acted when they were younger. Izuku spent most of the ride to UA reading over the instructions for his new costume and support items. Apparently, the tasers at the ends of his batons still worked when they were collapsed down to the handles, and the grappling hook had a motorized line with 3 speed settings, so he could easily scale buildings. The support course had really thought of everything. He suspected that Mr. Aizawa had advised them, as he had plenty of experience fighting and navigating the city without the help of a combative quirk like most heroes. An unfamiliar warm feeling welled up in his stomach. Why had they done this for him? Did he really deserve it? He spent the rest of the trip staring out the window. The student dorm was empty when they arrived. Aizawa explained that the class had already begun their training for the day, and he'd be meeting them in the gym. Izuku was shown to his room, where there was already some new casual clothes in the dresser, and a UA gym uniform and school uniform hanging in the closet. Change into your costume. We'll be headed to the gym next, Aizawa told him. Izuku changed quickly, noting how the new black pants that came with his costume were fitted, but still had enough give to allow him full range of motion. He zipped up his new hoodie and put on his belt of darts, which he noticed had 2 loops on the side to hold his batons when he wasn't using them. He was about to open the door to leave his room when something red caught his eye. Sitting next to the door was a brand new pair of his favorite red high-topped sneakers with a note taped to one of them. He stooped and picked up the paper, recognizing the handwriting at once. For my favorite hero. I saw your old ones were too small. I hope these are the right size. I'm sorry I didn't believe in you, and I'm so sorry I stopped searching. I promise from now on to support you with everything I have. I just know you'll do great things. I know you're not allowed to leave campus yet, so I'll come visit you as soon as I can, and I'll bring you some of that bubble tea you used to love so much. I'm so proud of you. I hope to see you soon. Izuku stared down at his old, scuffed, too small shoes with the hole in the big toe, and a tear fell from the end of his nose to the floor. He hastily swiped his sleeve across his face, and knelt to change into his new shoes. They fit perfectly. He stood, and stuck his mother's note to his mirror. Then, after a few deep breaths to steady his nerves, he opened the door and joined Mr. Aizawa, ready to meet his new classmates, and begin his new life at last. Izuku followed his new homeroom teacher into the gym where his new classmates were training. The floor was cement and had been shaped into several different types of terrain for practice. He watched them for a moment, spotting a few familiar heads of hair among the students as they practiced with their quirks. Attention, everyone! The students all stopped what they were doing and turned to face their teacher. One by one, they made their way over. Someone in heavy white armor with some sort of speed quirk arrived first, and Izuku recognized him as the kid he'd found about to be killed by Stain. A girl with pink skin and hair surfed over on acid she appeared to be producing from her feet, and another student floated down from the high platform she stood on. She was the one with the anti-gravity quirk who fought Kaken. He also spotted the redhead he'd tackled during their escape, and Todoroki, the runner-up in the sports festival who'd frozen him. Soon, all the students were gathered around. All those eyes staring at him were making him nervous. Kaken shoved his way to the front of the group and met his eyes, a wry smile on his face. Meet your new classmate, Aizawa said with a wave in his direction. Izuku swallowed hard and raised his hand in greeting. I'm Izuku Midoriya. It's nice to meet you all. Suddenly everyone was clamoring to introduce themselves to him. My name is Tenya Ida. I'm the representative for Class 1A. Hey, I'm Mina Ishido. Ochako Uraraka. Nice to meet you. Tsu Azui, but please call me Tsu. Hey, I'm Ejiro Kirishima. The name's Sato. That's enough. Mr. Aizawa cut off the chatter and took a step forward. Midoriya is going to be joining your training, but he's also here for another reason. He has incredible hand-to-hand skills. Some of you could stand to learn how to fight without relying too much on your quirks. The pro turned to face him. You up for a little demonstration? Izuku nodded and pulled his batons from his belt, extending them with a sharp flick. A chance to fight under non-deadly circumstances would certainly be a nice change of pace, and he was eager to test out his new support items. Good. Then he turned back to the students. Kaminari, Uraraka, Ojiro, come forward. The 3 students he'd named obeyed. 3-on-1. Use your quirks if you want for now. Go whenever you're ready. He waved a hand and stepped off to the sidelines to observe. Wait, doesn't that seem unfair? The girl who'd introduced herself as Uraraka looked worried. I wouldn't worry about it if I were you, Aizawa commented dryly, and Izuku grinned. He slid his left foot out to widen his stance and prepared himself to face the 3 students. One of them had a tail, another appeared to have an electric quirk, and the girl was the one he'd seen floating earlier. The one with the tail charged him first, and Izuku had to jump backwards to avoid being flattened by a heavy blow from his extra limb. He spun on one leg and kicked the boy's back foot out from under him. Then his baton connected with his shoulder and the boy with the tail went down hard. He looked up. The girl named Uraraka came next, and Izuku dove to the side and rolled to avoid her. There, he was met by the other boy, whose hand sparked as he reached down to zap him. From his place on the ground, he crossed his batons in front of him, and the electromagnetic field shimmered in the air. Then he wrenched the batons apart, feeling some resistance from them, and the shockwave threw the kid with the electric quirk backwards. Footsteps behind him told him Uraraka was coming up fast, and he turned to meet her, but not fast enough to avoid the hand that brushed his left shoulder. Suddenly, he was weightless and he began floating up into the air, first 5 meters, then 10, then so she had a touch-activated quirk. Thinking fast, he shot his grappling hook, which connected to the floor behind her, and switched on the motorized line. It pulled him rapidly toward the ground, and he pressed both buttons on his batons, and the ends sparked with electricity. As soon as he was in range, he jabbed both ends into Uraraka's back. She yelped, then collapsed to the floor, and the weightlessness ceased. Izuku felt himself falling the rest of the way to the ground and landed in a crouch, batons held at the ready. Then he looked around. His 3 opponents groaned from where they lay on the floor, and the rest of the class was staring at him with wide eyes. For a moment, nobody said anything. The first person to speak was Uraraka. Wow, that was amazing, she gushed, breathing hard, and she wore a dazzling smile as she staggered to her feet. Soon, the rest of the class was talking too. Wow, you took them down like it was nothing. That was so awesome, cried an enthusiastically waving empty pair of gloves that must be an invisible student. Trace magnifique. That was a blonde boy in a glittering cape and ridiculous glasses, speaking with a bad French accent that was almost definitely faked, or at least over-exaggerated. That was totally crazy. The pink girl with the acid quirk who'd introduced herself as Mina was practically bouncing up and down. Okay, that was pretty kick-ass, admitted an alternative-looking girl whose earlobes seemed to end in audio jacks. You've got some serious skills, man, the boy named Kirishima said, looking impressed. It seems there is much you have to teach us. A student with a bird's head nodded sagely. Yeah, and I didn't even see him use his quirk. That was a boy with strange-looking elbows, who helped the boy with the electricity quirk off the ground. He ran his fingers through his yellow hair after he stood, then turned to Izuku. Hey, Midoriya, what is your quirk, anyway? That was when the students turned expectantly to look at him, and he saw Kaken freeze. They made eye contact for a moment, and Kakin looked mortified. But he wasn't ashamed anymore. Izuku holstered his batons and stood tall. I don't have one. Some of the students exchanged confused glances, and Mr. Aizawa nodded in encouragement from behind them. Izuku suddenly smiled wide, wider than he had in years. I'm the first Quirkless person to ever make it into UA's hero course. Soon, I hope to be the world's first Quirkless pro hero. Izuku followed his new classmates to the locker rooms to change after training. It had gone better than he could have hoped. Mr. Aizawa had assigned him to work on combat without quirks with 3 students. Yaoyorozu, who had a creation quirk that wasn't terribly useful in a fight unless she could use the weapons she made, Tokoyami, whose quirk was powerful but unsuited for certain enemies, and Uraraka, the nice girl with the gravity quirk he'd fought earlier. Yaoyorozu produced a simple staff for each of them, and he'd walk them through the basics of his fighting style, which focused mainly on using an opponent's power and momentum against them. He had been surprised when Uraraka was the first to unbalance him. But, now that he thought about it, she had been the only one able to use her quirk on him during his demonstration when he'd first arrived, so maybe that wasn't too surprising. He pulled off his hoodie and began folding it to replace in the case when he suddenly realized the room had gone quiet. He looked up. Ida, Kirishima, Kaminari and Todoroki were all staring at him. Or rather, they were staring at his arms. In the short-sleeved undershirt of his new hero costume, the scars that ran up and down every inch of both arms, from the knife slashes, self-inflicted and otherwise, to the pockmarked handprints left by Tamura's quirk, were plainly visible. Ida's eyes were wide with shock, Kirishima looked concerned, and Kaminari looked almost impressed. Todoroki's face was unreadable. He squeezed his eyes shut and felt his face getting hot. He'd spent so long among villains in various states of physical disfigurement that he'd forgotten for a moment it wasn't normal. What the hell are all of you staring at? He heard Kakin growl. Can't you assholes mind your own DMN business? He let out a shaky breath. Then, without a word, he gathered his clothes and went to finish changing in one of the bathroom stalls. That night, Izuku lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of his new dorm room. He was exhausted. Earlier that evening, he'd spent some time hanging out with the rest of Class 1A. Everyone had been very friendly, although there had been a very uncomfortable silence when Kaminari had told him the scar on his face was pretty badass. After that, Kakin quickly silenced anyone who said anything about it with a glare. Making sure nobody upset him seemed to be Kakin's way of apologizing for the years of making his life hell. It had mostly just been polite small talk, but he had spent a long time talking to Uraraka. She was a ray of sunshine, so bright it almost hurt his eyes. She talked and talked and talked, but he didn't have to do anything but listen. She didn't pressure him to say anything about himself, his history, or his time with the League of Villains. And he was happy to listen to her, to nod and smile as she talked about noodles and cartoons and music and mochi and 100 other little things that he hadn't even thought about in years. Izuku rolled onto his side. This felt so strange, so foreign. Why were these people being so nice to him? He didn't deserve this. He curled himself into a ball and hugged his knees to his chest. His fingers brushed the scars on his arms. I don't belong here. He dug his fingernails into the pockmarked, damaged skin. I don't deserve this. He sighed and sat up. There was no way he was getting to sleep now. He checked the time. 3:37 a.m. Great. He swung his feet to the floor. At least no one else would be up. He stood and decided to go and get some tea from the kitchen. Maybe that would help. Yawning, he shuffled into the kitchen. The lights were dimmed after hours, but they still made him squint after the darkness of his room. Can't sleep? A voice from behind him made Izuku jump. Todoroki was leaning against a cabinet in the corner of the kitchen, and his expression was carefully neutral. Me either. I was just gonna make some tea, Izuku managed after a moment, suddenly very self-conscious. He'd worn a short-sleeved shirt to bed, and he hadn't expected anyone else to be awake, so he didn't put on sleeves. Todoroki nodded, and turned to open the cabinet he had been leaning against. He pulled out a tea box and 2 mugs, then filled the mugs and placed them both in the microwave. Izuku shook his head in tired confusion. Wait, are you heating the water in the microwave? Don't we have a tea kettle? Todoroki stiffened. I don't like tea kettles, was all he said. Izuku didn't press the matter, and sat down at the small table in the corner of the room. Todoroki finished making the tea in silence, and he brought the 2 mugs to the table, setting one in front of Izuku, and then sitting opposite him with the other. Thanks, he said, taking the mug. Then he looked up at Todoroki. So, what's keeping you up? He looked down and didn't answer. Izuku thought of the sports festival, and how scared he'd looked. It's okay if you don't want to talk about it. I get it. You do. Mismatched eyes met his. Yeah. He paused. I know about Endeavor. How? I watched the sports festival. Todoroki looked down at the mug in his hands. Was it really that obvious? Izuku shrugged. Not really. I just know what to look for, I guess. It seemed a little convenient that your quirks cancel out each other's weaknesses, and any villain worth their salt knows Endeavor can get violent fast, and he hates being #I didn't think it could be a coincidence. If he was somehow trying to make you into his successor to beat All Might by proxy, I knew probably wasn't being too nice about it. So I figured you weren't using your fire because of him. Todoroki didn't look up from his mug. You're very perceptive, Midoriya. I don't think being perceptive has anything to do with it, Izuku mumbled, picking absent-mindedly at one of the rough, uneven scars on his forearm. I just know what it's like. Being so scared and so mad all the time. Todoroki looked up at him. The look on his face was hard to place. It was like recognition. Even though the 2 of them could not be more different, one quirkless and raised by villains, the other the unbelievably powerful child of a great hero, they were the same. They sat at that table for a long time, and Todoroki told him everything. How his father had trained him from the moment his quirk appeared. How his mother, driven to the brink of madness by fear of his father, burned him. How for so long he'd refused to use his father's quirk, partly despite him, but also in part because he hated the way the flames felt on his body. I hate using my old man's quirk, he admitted. I hate how it makes me feel. I don't want to be like him. But you're not him. You don't have to be, Izuku murmured. Todoroki stared at him. You can be your own kind of hero. It's not his power, it's yours. He looked down at his hands. I mean, they taught me how to fight because they wanted me to be a villain. A weapon. They used me to hurt people. But my skills and my strength are mine, and I can use them to become who I want to be. And I want to be a hero. Todoroki looked down at the table, and Izuku could see the gears turning in his head. I suppose I have a lot to think about, he said finally. Then he looked up at Izuku and smiled a little. Thanks, Midoriya. Then he checked the microwave clock. It's past, we should probably get to bed. Izuku nodded and stood. He dumped out the cold remains of his tea and placed the mug in the sink. Todoroki did the same. They left the kitchen and parted ways to go to their own rooms. Good night, Todoroki. Good night. Katsuki was surprised by how not weird it was to have Deku in his class again. He seemed to be settling in pretty well after only a few days, and he already was friends with Uraraka and Ida. He was also getting along pretty well with Icy Hot, so that was something. After training that afternoon, Katsuki went to the common area and found most of the class already there. Mina was sitting sideways on the couch with her legs in Yairosa's lap, and Jiraiya was seated cross-legged on the floor in front of them with one ear plugged into her phone. Kaminari was upside down in one of the armchairs, and Ida was lecturing him about it while Tsu looked on, mildly amused. Zero and Half were on the opposite couch, in a deep discussion of the latest issue of whatever manga they were reading now, and Deku was sitting on the far side of the room in the other chair with Uraraka perched on the arm. He was just listening to her talk, and he wore a small smile. It was the first time in as long as he could remember he'd ever seen his old friend look actually relaxed. Even in his memory, Deku always looked kinda nervous. But now, he was slouching in his chair with one foot propped on the coffee table and his head leaned back against the seat. Kirishima emerged from the kitchen. When he saw Katsuki across the room, he grinned and began making his way over. It happened almost too fast to see. Kirishima jogged over to the couches and chairs and moved to vault over the back of the one Deku was sitting in. The moment his hand touched the back of the chair, Katsuki saw Deku's entire body tense. His face went slack, his pupils contracted and his eyes were suddenly glassy and unfocused. And then, there was a blur of movement and a crash as Kirishima activated his quirk just in time to be slammed face-first into the coffee table. Deku was breathing hard, and he stood over Kirishima, pinning him by the wrist and the back of the neck. The room fell silent, and for a moment, nobody moved. Then, Deku blinked, and the glassy look in his eyes vanished. He seemed just as surprised as anyone else by what he had just done, and he immediately let go and clapped both hands to his mouth. Oh no, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. He scrambled back, looking absolutely mortified, and tripped backwards into the chair he'd been sitting in. His eyes darted around the room like he was searching for an escape route. Kirishima rubbed the back of his neck and sat up, and Deku shrank back into the chair, almost like he expected Kirishima to hit him. Actually, Katsuki thought, remembering how Shigaraki used his quirk on him when he got mad, he probably does. The thought made him want to punch something and he squeezed his hands into fists. No worries, man, that was actually kinda on me. Aizawa warned us not to sneak up on you. Kirishima laughed a little nervously and stood. There was a face-sized dent in the table now. That's the second time you've got me, you're gonna have to show me how to do that sometime. Deku just stared at him, looking somewhat confused by his reaction. After a moment, he managed to stammer, yeah, okay, sure. And just like that, everyone went back to their conversations. Izuku sat curled up on the armchair. Holy shit, he just attacked his classmate. I can't believe I just did that. He hadn't meant to. Sometimes, when he was startled, something would come over him and his instincts took over. He couldn't control himself when it happened, it was like his body moved on its own. The psychiatrist who came to see him after his escape said it was because of something called hypervigilance, a common symptom of PTSD, that put his whole body on constant high alert to keep him alive in an environment where he was always in danger. But PTSD or not, he just attacked someone completely out of nowhere. If it had been anyone but Kirishima, they would have been hurt, possibly badly, but everyone was acting like it was no big deal. But I don't understand, he mumbled. Don't understand what? Uraraka's voice pulled him out of his thoughts. Why everyone is being so nice to me? He looked up at her. I could have seriously hurt someone, and I didn't even know what I was doing, I just reacted. I'm dangerous to be around, and everyone's just acting like it's fine. Like it's no big deal. I don't get it. He realized after a moment that the room was quiet again. Everyone was staring at him. He must have been talking louder than he meant to. The tense silence in the room was palpable. Then, after a moment, Azui spoke up. You saved my life, Midoriya. He looked up at her, confused. At the Yushe, I haven't forgotten, she added with a small rib bit. Then she pulled aside her bangs. On her forehead, there were 4 small, evenly spaced, fingerprint-sized marks, with a 5th slightly larger one on her cheek. At the USJ, in his anger that All Might wasn't there, Tamura had attacked a student, and without thinking, Izuku had stopped him, earning himself a fresh handprint in the process. It was her. You stopped Shigaraki, even though you were clearly afraid of him. Even when you were with the villains, you acted like a hero. You saved me too. Ida stepped forward. From the hero killer, remember? Uraraka smiled at him, and once again he found himself almost blinded by the warmth behind it. We trust you because we can see you for who you really are. We can tell you're a hero, Deku. An unfamiliar feeling squeezed at Izuku's chest, and he could feel tears stinging at his eyes. Heat rose in his cheeks. Thanks, guys. Izuku looked up at his new classmates and he caught Kaken's eye from across the room. He smiled. Izuku smiled weakly back. Todoroki met his eyes too, and gave him a small nod. Maybe things would be okay after all. After about a week of training, Izuku was finally starting to feel like he belonged in Class 1A. While the other students were working on ultimate moves that maximize their quirks, he had been getting used to his new weapons and working in small groups with some of the other students to help them fight without always relying on their powers. Tokoyami was getting good with the staff, and he'd added a collapsible one to his costume, mainly to use for defense if he needed a chance to pull Dark Shadow under his cloak to recharge. Hagecure's hand-to-hand was improving too. He hadn't bothered going into using various weapons with her, because carrying a visible weapon would negate her advantage. She wasn't particularly physically strong, but that almost didn't matter, because once she took off her gloves it was near impossible to defend against her attacks when you couldn't see where they would land. Now he was sparring with a pair of ectoplasm's clones. He ducked a high kick from one, then sidestepped the other and tripped him with the end of his baton. The first one ran at him and he sidestepped again, this time grabbing the clone by the back of the neck and the shoulder, and used his own momentum to send him crashing to the ground in a heap on top of the other clone. All Might came in, looking skeletal but cheerful. He waved a greeting at Izuku, smiling wide. Izuku smiled back. A loud bang came from somewhere above him, and he looked up. High on a platform, Kaken was practicing a new move that put a hole through a thick cement wall. He appeared to be concentrating his blasts. That was smart. Izuku was about to turn back to the clones of ectoplasm he was fighting when a rumble of shifting rock caught his attention. Part of the wall Kaken had just destroyed was cracking, and a large piece of cement broke off. The boulder seemed to fall in slow motion as it careened straight for All Might. Hey! Watch out! Izuku felt his feet move before he could think. He sprinted across the open floor and drew his batons from his belt as he ran. He skidded to a halt in front of All Might, raised his batons above his head and crossed them at the silver bands around the middle. The boulder slowed as the magnetic field shimmered in the air, but it clearly wouldn't be enough to stop it. He wrenched the batons apart hard, there was a loud crack, and he was engulfed in a cloud of dust. When the dust cleared, the boulder was in 3 large pieces around Izuku and All Might. His classmates had all stopped what they were doing to see what was happening. Kaken was staring down at him with wide eyes. He looked over his shoulder at All Might, who was looking at him with an expression he couldn't place. The warmth in those sunken eyes made heat rise in his cheeks. Are you okay, All Might? The former pro smiled broadly at him. Yeah. I am now. Whoa, Midoriya, you totally wasted that rock, Kaminari said, sounding impressed. Kirishima stood at his shoulder and gave Izuku a toothy grin. Yeah man, that was awesome. Izuku flushed. Even after spending a week at UA, he still wasn't used to praise. Before he joined the villains, he'd never been praised for much of anything, and once he had, it had always been hollow, just another way to manipulate him. He shuffled his feet awkwardly. I've still got a lot of work to do, he muttered mostly to himself, fidgeting with his weapons. The shockwave from his batons wasn't all that powerful. It probably wouldn't have worked at all if the boulder hadn't already been cracked from Kaken's blast. I don't know if I'll ever be able to do anything at the level of an ultimate move like you guys. I just can't manage that kind of raw power. I don't know, came All Might's voice from behind him. Izuku looked around. Based on that move, I'd say you're closer than you think, so you should be ready for this test. Besides, I think you're seriously underestimating the value of your real-world experience. The fact that you're even standing here now speaks volumes about your abilities. Izuku blinked, then stared down at the floor, eyes stinging. Why was the former pro looking at him like that? With warmth and even pride in his sunken eyes? And why did a few kind words suddenly make him feel as though he might cry? All Might, it's dangerous in here, you should be careful, Mr. Aizawa said, looking tired and annoyed as usual. All Might's smile faltered. Izuku supposed after decades of being the #1 hero, needing to be protected probably didn't sit well with him. All Might turned to look up at the top of the platform Kaken stood on and called up to him. Sorry for the scare, young Bakugo. A loud blast answered him. You watch yourself, All Might, Kaken bellowed. All Might's shoulders sagged. Izuku watched him lower his head and turn away. How must it feel, he wondered, to go from the symbol of peace to the damsel in distress? Kaminari's voice interrupted his thoughts. He and Kirishima were showing off their improved costumes. That's enough, Class A. The door swung wide to reveal a pro-hero flanked by a few students Izuku didn't recognize. Class B is scheduled to use this training room every afternoon. Class B? UA's other hero course class. He didn't know anything about them. The only students Izuku had met so far were his classmates. In particular, he noticed the blonde boy wearing a hideous coat with tails was eyeing him with great interest. He stepped forward and grinned. You must be the newest member of Class 1A. Is it true you're really Quirkless? There was a horrible sneer in his voice. And I thought this class could sink no lower. Izuku just blinked at him at a loss for words. Aye. You know if you two fought, he'd beat you, right? Kirishima's voice came from behind him. Izuku looked around, and the blonde boy froze. He's a good enough fighter that he got into UA without needing a power. And you wouldn't have anything to copy. Besides, I don't think it's very manly to make fun of something someone is born with. Or without. The boy from Class B turned very red. Then, he spun abruptly on his heel and turned to address the whole room. Hey, did you hear? The licensing exam has a 50% pass rate. That means your entire class might fail. He began positively howling with laughter, and Izuku's classmates all rolled their eyes. Sorry about him, he's just like that, came a friendlier-sounding voice. A girl with orange hair in a high ponytail looked apologetic. I'm Kendo, and that's Minoma. Nice to meet you, new kid. Izuku smiled weakly back. Mr. Aizawa and the other class's teacher were explaining that they'd be tested at different locations from the other class to avoid schools competing with themselves. Minoma suddenly looked very relieved. What a shame we won't face each other directly. Izuku scoffed. All those other schools, Shiro thought aloud. So we'll be fighting kids from other places. Izuku nodded. Plus we're taking the test earlier than other students, so they've had more time to train than us. And everyone's had more time to train than me, he added silently. Though his combat experience was nothing to sneeze at, he'd had only a week of actual hero training. That's true, said their homeroom teacher. Very few first years in the country try for a provisional license. In other words, this test will be made up of students who have trained longer than you, and with quirks you don't know about. Ones that are powerful. The actual content of the exam is a mystery, but you can expect that you're going to have a rough time. Mr. Aizawa's eyes burned into his. Try not to get hung up about that, but keep it in mind. After training, the class changed into casual clothes and walked back to the dorms. Izuku was listening to another of Uraraka's stories when he heard someone calling his name. Hey, Midoriya. Izuku turned. Oh hey, Kirishima. What is it? Kirishima caught up to him, looking serious. I wanted to apologize. I'm the one who told one of the kids in Class 1B that you're Quirkless. He rubbed the back of his neck and looked down. I wasn't trying to gossip or anything, honest. I just thought it was really cool and manly that you didn't need one, you know? And I was telling Tetsu about you and I think Minoma heard. Sorry. Izuku blinked. He could hear nothing but genuine sincerity in Kirishima's voice. It had clearly never even occurred to him that quirklessness was something to be ashamed of and ridiculed. Oh that? I'm used to it. He shrugged. It doesn't really bother me anymore. I know I'm strong enough to survive, and that's all that matters, really. Quirkless doesn't mean useless, and it doesn't mean powerless either. I make my own power. Kirishima beamed at him and murmured something about manliness, and Izuku and Uraraka laughed. The laughter bubbled up from deep in his chest and spilled over, making him feel lighter and fuller all at the same time. Together they climbed the front steps of their dorm building, and when Izuku collapsed on his bed a while later, he found himself wondering, is this what having friends is like? He had never been happier. Sure, he was still sometimes a nervous wreck, and there had been the incident where he'd tackled Kirishima a few days ago, but overall he was honestly surprised it was going this well. Class 1A had welcomed him with open arms, but they didn't know everything about him. If they knew the specifics about his villainous history, he was sure they'd be less friendly. His newfound happiness felt like a Jenga tower. The higher he built it, the more likely it was to topple with the slightest wrong move. For once in his life, Izuku was somewhere he belonged. Now all he had to do was not screw it up. On the morning of the provisional licensing exam, Izuku woke about an hour before his alarm. He lay in bed for a while, willing himself to go back to sleep. He needed all the rest he could get after all. The nervous energy that started as a small knot in his stomach gradually spread to anxious jitters that felt like his whole body was electrified. He groaned and sat up, checking his clock. The alarm was set to go off in 7 minutes. No point now, he thought, shutting off the alarm and clambering out of bed. He threw on an old, worn hoodie with a small, faded logo of All Might's iconic hair printed on it over the short-sleeved shirt he slept in. The hoodie was one of the few things from home that still fit him, as it was far too big for him when he first bought it. He pulled up the collar and buried his face in it, breathing deep through his nose. Mom still used the same detergent. He let the familiar smell wash over him and felt his nerves steady somewhat. Then he opened his door, squinting at the bright lights from the hall, and trudged down the corridor to the bathroom. When Izuku reached the common area, a voice made him jump. "Hey, Deku!" Izuku turned. Uraraka's hair was sticking up at odd angles and her eyes drooped with tiredness, but her voice was bright and chipper as always. "Oh, hey Uraraka. You excited for the exam today?" Izuku shuffled his socked feet. "I dunno if excited is the word I'd use," he mumbled. "Yeah, I know what you mean." She sighed, then plastered a broad smile on her face. "We're gonna do great, okay?" Her confidence sounded a little forced, but Izuku said nothing. "Well, I'm gonna go get ready." Izuku watched her go for a moment, then turned and headed for the boys' bathroom in the opposite direction. Izuku showered, brushed his teeth, and headed back to his room to get dressed. He saw a few more of his classmates on the way back, bleary-eyed and sleepy, and waved a non-committal greeting as he passed. When he reached his room, he tossed the hoodie onto his bed and opened his closet. There, untouched since his arrival 2 weeks ago, hung the neatly pressed blazer, shirt, tie, and pants of his new school uniform. For a moment he hesitated. The past 2 weeks had been the happiest of his life, but it felt almost like an impossible dream. Putting on the uniform, his UA school uniform, made it seem real. "I'm really going to be a hero." Izuku stepped off the bus with the rest of his classmates, tugging anxiously at his collar. He hated the pressure of the tie around his neck, but at least he'd get to change into his costume soon. He glanced around nervously at the assembled students from schools across the country. "There's so many people." He swallowed hard. Crowds were too unpredictable, with too many variables, too many chances for something to go wrong. "I'm getting kind of nervous," Jiru groaned. Mr. Aizawa got off the bus last and addressed the class as a group. "If you can pass this test and receive your provisional licenses, you'll go from novices to semi-pros." He fixed them all with a stern glare. "I expect your best." Kirishima led the class in a cheer of plus ultra. But Izuku noticed a stranger's voice join in, shouting over even his most enthusiastic classmates. It was a huge boy, a student from another school. Everyone stared. "You know, it's pretty rude to bust in on other people's huddles like that, Inesa." More students in the same uniform were standing behind the stranger. Inesa blinked. "Oh, pardon me. I'm so very, extremely sorry." Inesa bowed so forcefully that his head made an audible smack against the pavement. Izuku took a step back, thoroughly unnerved. "Who the hell is this guy? I do not trust his enthusiasm," Kaminari said, voicing everyone's thoughts. "Hey, look at their uniforms. They're from that other famous hero school, on the other side of the country." "UA in the east, Shiketsu in the west," Kaken murmured, glaring a challenge at the Shiketsu students. "Right," Izuku thought. "Shiketsu High. Their hero program actually rivals UA's." Inesa was yelling again, but Izuku was distracted by one of the other students. It was a girl, also in a Shiketsu uniform, and she was staring at him with an odd expression. She caught his eye and smiled, and something about that smile sent chills down his spine. The Shiketsu students left, but when Mr. Aizawa began explaining something about the boy who'd burst into their huddle, Izuku couldn't really listen. He stared after the girl. Did she know him somehow? She seemed familiar, but he couldn't think of how they could have met. Did she recognize me? Does she know I'm Ghost? Izuku shivered. He thought, at last, that he'd left his old life as an assassin behind, but something about that girl was unsettling. Eraser? I'd know that scowl anywhere. A woman's voice pulled Izuku out of his thoughts. A woman in a hero costume, with green hair and a bandana, waved at Mr. Aizawa with a huge grin. "I saw you on TV and at the sports festival, but it's been a while since we were this close in person." Izuku recognized her at once. The Smile Hero. Her quirk is outburst, he rattled off almost automatically. She forces people around her to laugh uncontrollably until they can't think or move. Even the best villains have a hard time against her. Ms. Joke was relentlessly teasing Mr. Aizawa, who just looked exhausted. Then, she turned and called over her shoulder to a group of students wearing gray uniform polos. "Over here, everyone. This is you." Her students approached, talking excitedly amongst themselves. "Oh wow, it's really Class A. I've seen them on TV." A black-haired boy darted forward and grasped Izuku's hands. He flinched. "I'm Shindu. I know most of your class from TV, but I don't think I've seen you before." Shakily, Izuku pried his hands out of Shindu's grasp. He was smiling, but there was an odd look in his eye, a cold determination. Please don't touch me," Izuku muttered in a small voice, staring hard at the ground and trying not to tremble. Shindu ignored him, moving over to Kaminari and taking his hands too. "Your class has been through a lot recently, haven't you?" He took Jiru's hands next. "But even so, you're all still working hard to be pro-heroes. It's wonderful. You all have hearts full of fortitude. That's what every hero needs." He's too nice, Izuku thought. What's he trying to hide? And Bakugo. Izuku looked up to see Shindu address a scowling Kaken. "It must have been hard for you, getting kidnapped and all that. You have a strong will. Today I'm gonna do my best to learn from you." He extended a hand. "I hope you don't mind." Kaken slapped away Shindu's outstretched hand. "Stop pretending," he growled. "Your words don't match the look in your eyes." "Hey man, don't be so rude," Kirishima protested, apologizing profusely on Kaken's behalf. Something about Shindu made Izuku uneasy. "Get your costumes and head to orientation," Aizawa told them. Izuku swallowed his uneasiness and did as he was told. Once Izuku changed into his costume, he felt significantly better. He clipped his batons, collapsed down to their handles, on his belt, and followed his classmates to orientation. Nothing could have prepared him for the crowd. Thousands of students were all packed together, and he jumped every time someone brushed his shoulder. "You okay?" Uraraka's voice murmured from behind him. "What? Oh yeah, I'll be fine." Izuku swallowed. "Crowds make me a little nervous, that's all." Uraraka smiled her warm, blinding smile. "You can totally do this." Izuku was about to thank her for the encouragement, when a tired voice came over the loudspeakers and began explaining the rules. Each of them would be given 3 targets and 6 balls. They were to affix the targets to their costumes, and if all 3 targets were hit by the ball, they would fail. To pass, they had to take out 2 people. "Those of you who don't have the speed just won't cut it," the tired man was explaining. "Which is why that's what you'll be tested on. The first 100 students to fulfill the requirements will pass." Nervous muttering spread through the assembled students. "But there's over 1,500 people here. I thought around half of us would pass. This means it'll actually be less than 5%. Oh man, I'm getting way more nervous now." Given the circumstances, Izuku thought, I don't think this could be much better for me. Taking out targets and hitting weak points was his specialty, after all. Although, usually I have a chance to research my opponent's quirks beforehand. We've been given exactly enough ball to pass, although stealing points after someone else has already hit 1 or 2 targets is definitely an option. But that also means someone else could do the same to us. All those other schools. He grimaced. This is gonna be tough. A huge rumble interrupted Izuku's thoughts. The ceiling of the room they were in split open, and the walls folded down like a box, revealing the testing arena. It was a huge facility, with different terrains all over, like the USJ. I'm sure you all have different terrains that you like or would rather avoid. Use your quirks well and do your best. Or not. Whatever. Around them, students from all schools raced out into the arena, spreading out but staying in relatively large groups. It makes sense that students are working with their classmates. It'll be easier to take down targets as a team, with quirks they already know. Izuku looked to his classmates. We should stay together. It'll be easier to fight them as a group. They nodded. Yeah, right, Kaken snarled, fixing Izuku with a glare. This isn't FNG field trip. He stalked away, and Kirishima went after him, protesting. After a moment, Kaminari followed to. I'm going alone too, Todoroki said, turning to leave. My quirk is dangerous for a big group. Kaken. Todoroki. Izuku called after them, but it was no use. Midoriya, come on, we have to focus on the test. We can't worry about them now. Yaoyorozu was right, of course, as usual. As a group, the class headed for the landslide zone. But it's not a good idea for them to go off on their own. Izuku protested. Think about it. Everyone already knows about all of your quirks. You think they did research? Uraraka asked. Of course. The sports festival, came Ida's reply. Right? Izuku said. The sports festival was broadcast across the country. These other schools already know your quirks, and they probably know your fighting styles and weaknesses too, to an extent. Mina looked doubtful. Are you sure they really got all that just from the sports festival? Izuku fixed her with a serious look. Well, I did. She blinked at him and said nothing else. He continued, the other schools are probably going to be sticking together, and it's likely that first, they'll go up against quirks they know. Which means dash. An alarm cut him off, and a female voice announced, the first phase of the exam will now begin. Immediately, students descended from rocky cliffs on all sides. Izuku felt his stomach drop. I knew it. He unclipped his batons from his belt and extended them, bracing himself for the worst. Ball flew at them from all directions. Thinking fast, Izuku ran forward to the front of the group and leapt into the air. At the high of his jump, he crossed his batons and pulled them apart hard. The shockwave threw most of the incoming ball back. He touched down in a crouch, ready to leap again. Tokoyami's dark shadow appeared from behind him, swiping ball out of the air with ease. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Uraraka floating out of range. Siro caught ball with his tape, and Mina blocked them with her new defensive special move. Yaoyorozu produced several large shields, and Ida dodged and wove through the onslaught with his speed. At the front of the attacking students was Shindu, his smile now cocky and intimidating. Izuku straightened. His nervousness, somehow, had entirely dissipated. Now, he felt nothing but excited, confident energy. We've got this, you guys. Let's show them what we can do. We've got this. Izuku smiled. I've got this. The first phase of the exam will now begin. Immediately, the testing arena descended into chaos. Class 1A, minus Kaken, Kirishima, Kaminari, and Todoroki, found themselves surrounded, with students from other schools racing down the rocky cliffs on all sides, and Ms. Joke's class from Ketsubutsu was leading the attack. Newly developed ultimate moves were flying left and right. Dark Shadow caught Izuku's eye as it swiped ball from the air, and to his other side Siro's tape flew past. I guess we shouldn't be surprised Yue won't go down without a fight, Shindu mused, smirking, while his classmate used his quirk on a few ball before handing them off to another. The student in the scarf caught the ball and they glowed in his hands. His quirk? But what does it do? The Ketsubutsu student smirked and threw the glowing ball. In midair, they turned sharply and plunged into the hard-packed dirt in front of him. They went underground? His quirk must control trajectory. But where are they gonna pop out? Jairu elbowed her way forward. Get back, I'll handle this. She plugged both jacks into her new gloves, knelt, and slammed her knuckles into the ground. Heartbeat distortion. The ground in front of her split open as the incredible sound waves tore through it. Ketsubutsu students leaped out of the way and the ball burst out of the earth. They veered in midair and made their way straight for Mina, who yelped, then cried, "Acid veil," throwing up a wall of her thickest acid. The ball hissed and dissolved on contact. For a moment the two classes stared at each other in a stalemate. Okay, what's our strategy? They're holding back right now, trying to observe and learn weak points. We are too. Any minute now, though, the real fight begins. Everyone will be focused on protecting their targets. There's no way we can just hit them by chance. I can deal with that. We just need to be precise, protect our weak points and look for an opening. Izuku let out a breath and squared his shoulders. Let's do this. Out of the way. That was Shindu, calling to his other classmates. Their defenses are too strong right now. I'll fix that. Izuku certainly didn't like the sound of that. Shindu crouched and put both palms on the ground. Maximum force. Around him, the ground tore apart, and Izuku barely had time to look back at his classmates before the resulting earthquake carried him off his feet and away from them. What a powerful quirk! Izuku thought to himself as he stood, rubbing his head. Then he looked around. The landscape of the surrounding area had been completely torn apart, and the rest of Class 1A was nowhere to be seen. They split us up. Was this Ketsubutsu's plan all along? He grimaced. I might be better off on my own anyway, at least in a fight like this. I just hope everyone else passes. The other schools have had so much more time to train and learn to work together. He thought of the already amazing display of quirks and strengths he'd seen so far. We're up against strong students from all over the country. I don't know why, but it's almost exciting. A blur of movement dragged him from his thoughts. In just a fraction of a second, a figure in black appeared in front of him, jumped up, vaulted over his shoulders, and managed to hit the target on his left shoulder, causing it to beep and light up. What the hell? Where did? Tag, you're it? A playful girl's voice came from behind him. Izuku turned to face his attacker and froze. It was her. The girl from Shiketsu who stared at him like she knew him. She smirked. Not smart, staring off into space like that. You know, I think you're so cool. I tracked you down because I knew UA would be ganged up on, and I didn't want to miss the chance to interact with such a prestigious school. But I've taken quite an interest in you. Izuku considered. I know I'm a UA student now, but I wasn't in the sports festival. She must have some connection to Ghost. She must recognize me somehow. Who the hell is she? You sure like to talk a lot, he said aloud, voice low. The girl grinned and threw first a rock, which he sidestepped, then a ball, which he had to twist around to avoid, losing sight of her. When he turned back, the girl from Shiketsu was gone. Sheet, where'd she go? All I have to do is touch you and that makes two. A gleeful voice far too close behind him made him dive forward, away from the ball in her outstretched hand, and he rolled to his feet. He readied his own ball and turned to face her, but she's gone again? Her quirk maybe? You think my quirk lets me disappear? Her voice was in his ear, then a hand on his wrist and the back of his neck slammed him to the ground. No! The breath was knocked out of his chest, and he felt her knee in the small of his back. He was pinned. No. That's not it. I was just hiding. It's just a technique. I can make my opponent's eyes and ears blind and deaf to my presence. I just have to close my eyes, hold my breath, and clear my mind. Izuku could feel her breath hot on his neck. He tried his hardest not to tremble from head to toe. There was something about her that was horribly familiar. She was almost predatory. The hardest part is not thinking, to be honest. She giggled. I'm glad we're learning about each other. Now, I have a question for you. She leaned in so close that her lips brushed his ear. Her voice was barely audible, but still it rang in Izuku's ears. What are you doing here, Zuzu? In that moment, Izuku's brain short-circuited. Only one coherent thought screamed at him in his mind. Toga. It's Toga. She's here.